hlahla masholo ga moloki hlaga metsi a etse keledi go ba keledi mo ntšhafatsa ditšhaba teng ditšhaba di tswang go wena mo bong di tlang go boela go wena magaelong lesedi lesedi
We are now going to hear the traditional praise. Meaning ditoko tsa Morena Moshoeshoe.
Sorama setinale mokwa tsala sia ba kwena tlabisa go tlabisa khona go tlabisa masetinane a ke a rola re khimela a re mehlohlo ke a dikgomole ya batho khoma batho tsilo matlama a mohlakolane umhlakolane dithebe ya dithebe umhlakolane ke le gofela dithebe tsile phabietele le batho ba ke le ga yana ba saile le go mo dikene ka yana tsaile batho go kene ba ma le go mo kene tsena ka ditelele mo godisana wa re twele shano wa re ngwana na gatwa monna o bena go tla bo mahlodi le minako khesa o yeme ka khotla o yeme ka fatesa makatla o ntse a tshotlela dithabeng e ka rosa le teng motlhomelo sa le tshebe go ba go be sa le tshebe go mo ra le fatle ya ba le fatshe la eno le ya le fatshe la mabewana la nka tuba magisa batho ba maboya le ka ba hafi ina bele re ha khodu ha motho mora dumela bra khomo le ya tla a hlaba motho lo twa se tawo ya Israela ka mabukani ka manala mathama nke morolo mo khitwa dikono kwa le tla dikemere tla kena tuma hlabula le thoasa ra mo hata o tshikana le dinyano tshikana ngwana a sa le mo fetu a se tsebe ho tshika e re a tshika a re feke e re a tshika a re tinya e be feke sona ha tinya go boga ka ba diana go mo ke o ka ira ka pele o ka ira ka di bollela phofo le tso mona na belo a matlama le tso la o ka le na bela phatso la sa phatso la na bela thukwa ga di le mmala le tso go ga di lo ya se ka bofu o se tle ka kwa moradilo o se tle banana ba itse di hlo ba ntse ba ka tla melala ka le ro ga ba nne mo pena re ka be re go tlaba le tsela thebe mabenyane wa rantsofa thebe I thabela mogosi o tlhabela tshopo mogosi le qele bohweng ba tshopo phiripa ditse o itse ka thiba ka lekoko monyako a thuba ka thadi a bile a thiba le ka mofefe wa ngwana ha o sa le tau le tlonkana ha o sa le tau mo hatsang tsoga o le firitsa le la ramatlolo le le di kgomo matsele matha dinala tau la bo magabale nkwa le roboko nkwa ilume raba pe untsalla ke tshwantshwantsa ba sathu ba sapo wa tlo ba lela melo batho ba lela misafra dinonyana itse ba fitla ba sheba ba kabaka mongare sapola ngwa le sukile ye mongare sapola ngwa le sukile ke mo matlama benga a ba jela teng he thatane ha ila ra thangana e ba ihlola gwana e hlola tshitja go mo tsa direng e hlola tshitja go mo tsa direng e ka ro sa le teng motlhomelo o sa le tshebe go ba go be o sa le tshebe go mo ra le fatse la ino le ya ba le ya le tso mo nana bela matlama le tsamala tso la na bela phasa la le tsa phasa ala na bela thukwa ga di o le mmala le tso ho ha sa le tse rutwa le thetso re thetsa ke ba makwanyane mama ba ka re tso le ngone e re ha re buya le je morapama ibe ke marahla thepolwa tsile wa rasi qeta thakara se qeta le rasi go gorong khotse molamo ya matlama molamo ra so ta ditose o tle se hlwa e gorong ke tswa di balane le badimo o ile mo ke tswa di balane motho wa bana mtsalo ra mtsa puta o puta lo go molamo am ra mo khatshale Moshoeshoe kwa kgabane ya mapulo go me motho wa mapulo gona ha e so sore e sa le boya kgomohadi Moshoeshoe wa raka di le bola ya byotseng la mona hentiteng ntse bana
Can we give him another round of applause? Now we're going to stand to sing the official opening with the national anthem of Lesotho, and also the national anthem of South Africa. We'll just wait for our choir to come in and assist in the singing part. to the choir for rendering the two anthems. We also want to acknowledge all the media present. We know that there are a lot of media houses present today. We also want to greet our community, our CUT community first, that is on social media, watching this specific prestigious event. We would also like to greet our new family from Lesotho, from the different districts inside of Lesotho that are also watching and are joining us on the different platforms. Some of them I know they are joining on YouTube. Some of them are also on Zoom. We want to welcome you all. And we also just want to give you a brief of what was happening before the event started. This specific event, that is the second session of an event where the Central University of Technology, Free State, was signing an MOU with the different institutions of higher learning of Lesotho. And we also acknowledge our sisters in higher education, which is our TVET colleges and the representatives that are here today. The pledge for education, especially in higher education, is for all of us, even though we are in different institutions, but the pledge and everything is for all of us. So we thank you today for joining us in this. The second part will now be done by Dr. Mohampanyana. I'm sure you're not here. Let me lie.
At the Central University of Technology, there is somebody who is in authority in this institution, who is going to welcome Basu to Kaharebu University. Basu, little Amuhel, Kimunga University, Mutiri Karabel Langyo. And therefore, I will ask Prof. Ngoi, come and welcome those people in this institution. Basut, kimunga onamuna. Kimunga onamuna. Kukupale mo amuhe. Prof. She's the one with the communication, she will translate it.
Thank you, Directors of Ceremony. Good evening to everyone. The Royal Majesty in absentia, the House of Traditional Leadership of Lesotho, Moreho Mopeli, Morena Nsane Mopeli, Morena Solo Mopeli, Lesotho High Commission, Commissioner Bereng, Diplomatic Attaché from Kenya High Commission, Mr. Adman Mohammed, the Chairperson of Central University of Technology Council, and all council members who are here, former Vice Chancellor of the National University of Lesotho, Professor Tefetso Mutibe, Vice Chancellor of the National University of Lesotho, Professor Olesula Fajana, in absentia. Rector of the Relotodi Polytechnic, Professor Spiriti Tadi. Principal of Moteo Technical and Vocational Education and Training, Professor Dipiolane Putsiti. Rector of the Lesotho College of Education, Dr. John Zimba. Members of CUT management who are here. Members of CUT Senate who are here. Representatives from the higher education sector, both in Lesotho and South Africa. Representatives from government, business and industry from both Lesotho and South Africa. Distinguished guests, staff and students of CUT and the other colleges, and colleagues who are watching from the cyberspace. Dumelang Basoto Baba Atle. I offer my cordial greetings to you and those watching from the comfort of their homes in the cyberspace. As I welcome you to this inaugural King Moshoeshoe 1 Memorial Lecture, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Professor Motibe for accepting our invitation and for coming to address us this evening. It is my fervent hope that your address tonight will help us draw a wealth of knowledge and lessons that will shape our thoughts and practices at the legacy of King Moshoeshoe 1. To our esteemed guests, the King Moshoeshoe 1 lecture series is going to become one of the most important calendar days in the life of our institutions, now and in the future. An annual event hosting of the King Moshoeshoe 1 Memorial Lecture signifies an important milestone in the history of the university, together with the National University of Lesotho, Lerotodi Polytechnic, and the Lesotho College of Education from the Kingdom of Basu, as well as Moteo Tibet College in South Africa. Each of these institutions will host a lecture and invite acclaimed scholars who have written extensively about the wisdom of King Moshoeshoe 1, his achievements, his diplomatic and the astute methods of leadership. So this lecture is just the first of this series. Over the years, the university has welcomed many international students from Lesotho who have chosen the Central University of Technology, Free State, as their preferred home away from home. They constitute most of our international students here in the university. The biggest challenge has always been how we engage with them and what value we attach to their participation and engagement with the university on matters of mutual interest. Just recently, a new international chapter of the University Alumni Association was launched in Maseru to reignite our relationship with these graduates. They spend time here at the university, they are back in Lesotho, but we decided that we want to reignite our relationships with them. This is an opportunity for the university to promote further interaction and engagements with our graduates in Lesotho through this collaboration. As CUT, we aspire to become a leading University of Technology in Africa by year 2030. The biggest part of this is reimagining education and language. It is for these reasons that we welcome the partnership of these institutions of higher learning represented here, as we believe that our partnership and collaboration with them will pay huge dividends and enable us to achieve our vision. Again, I say we want to be a leading African University of Technology, but we believe we must use the language which is appropriate. Morena Moshoeshoe I remains one of the most decorated and prominent leaders and historical figures in the history of African civilization. His legacy has been an inspiration to the Basotho nation and many nations that have known about his great deeds. For CUT, it is a great honor for us to host this inaugural lecture in remembrance of him as the founder of the Basotho nation. In the next few years, we will see this lecture grow to become an important intellectual platform for our institutions and partners to analyze King Moshoeshoe I's reign so that we can adopt the lessons of his leadership in the current conditions. Despite the fact that he lived long time ago, the lessons which he's teaching us can be applicable to these conditions. To Mr. Atman Mohammed, you are dear to the university, and it is always a pleasure to have you in our midst. To Commissioner Bereng and Consulate Lerota, we look forward to your continued support of the university in the future. The royal family of Basotho in Kwakwa, we acknowledge your presence here. Our understanding is that cooperating with traditional leaders is a matter of constitutional obligation. After all, our constitutional democracy recognizes the important functions of houses of traditional leaders in promoting traditional leadership within the context of the new dispensation to enhance unity and understanding among our communities. We appreciated the opportunity to interact with you earlier this afternoon during the signing of the memorandum. The confidence His Majesty has placed in you to represent the Royal House in this gathering, and his unwavering support towards our collective efforts in the higher education sector to promote the philosophy of Moshoeshoe among the Basotho. Please convey our sincere appreciation to Morena wa Basotho for his good heart and his love for his kingdom and the Basotho nation. Encapsulated in this year's lecture is the theme which I quoted, embracing the Moshoeshoe philosophy to advance curriculum renewal, Africanization, and decolonization. End of the quote. So you can see the importance of today's lecture is actually bringing Moshoeshoe and remove the so-called, to bring decolonization in whatever we are doing. These are the terms that are central in our quest to adjust, adopt, and make academic settings more African-friendly, whilst also conforming to the ethos of Ubuntu. In closing, I wish to extend my gratitude to all role players, some of whom are here and others are not here. And if I can just mention Mr. Matsotso, I'll just mention Professor Sepen, Dr. Malebo, Dr. Mantwa, and the registrars of all institutions who participated very effectively in getting this work done. We applaud you for the work well done. and for making this occasion possible. Your efforts have not gone unnoticed. Ekolto, Pula, Nala. Thank you very much.
Paropele Prof Maso. Prof, we thank you so much. At least now you are welcome. Basut, you can relax. You are welcome here at Central University of Technology. And we even know the purpose as to why we are here, because Prof has said it. Thank you, Prof. Basut, le amoelehile. Re leboha Prof ka mantswe a buileng. Re leboha ho tseba hore Morena Moshoeshoe ke motho a mofuta ofeng. Re thabetse ho tseba hore re Basotho ka lebaka la Morena Moshoeshoe. Morena Moshoeshoe ke ena ya kopantseng setjhaba sa Basotho. Ke ena ya entseng hore ebe re bitswa Basotho kajeno. The collaboration of the universities is so important because we cannot be educated and learn it, yet there are our sisters that we are leaving them behind. Therefore, this collaboration, it has to work for every one of us in all aspects of education and social. By so saying, I would just want to say that thanks, Prof, once more, and then I'll just proceed with the program. Program mona ha ke sheba re tlo tla re ba le presentation of Cemu concept. Ke tlo kopa hore le nthuse ho amohela Prof Kinewe Motshweni, the director of Moshoeshoe 1 Institute of Peace and Leadership from National University of Technology. NAL, it stands for National University of Lesotho. Yo, it's a limadimuna technology. Prof,
Bomele bontate ditumediso saka ho lona empa le a tseba hore Basotho ba na le mo ba busang hona teng. Ke kopa hore ke dumedise motlotlei ga Basotho le mofumahadi Masnati e leng yena Mmagona. Ke dumedise le morena wa rona wa Qwaqwa ya teng ha rona ka jeno re le Basotho. Ke be ke dumedise bookamedi ba sekolo sena ba re file monyetla hore ka jeno re ke re tlotla re bua ka taba tsa Basotho naheng ena ya rona Basotho. Ke dumedise baokamedi ba dikolo sena se kgolo se hlano se ka jeno di entseng boitlamo ba ho fetola maemo. Ke boele ke dumedise bahlanka bohle ba teng ho tswa mafapheng ohle a tshebetso e ka ba dikolong tsena tse ke buileng ka tsona tsa thuto e phahameng, e ka ba mafapheng ohle a mmuso wa naha tsena tse pedi le bohle kaofela ba phehisitse mokete mona. Ke boele ke dumedise hape baruti ba Moshoeshoe la ene le morena wa Basotho empa o la dumela tumelong ya hore modimo yena ka o ntse a le teng, mme baruti e tla dula e le bona ba re tsamaisang hore re etse ka botle re le Basotho. Ke boele ke dumedisa hape baeti bohle ba phehisitseng moketeng ona, e ka ba ke Basotho kapa ha se Basotho, mme bao e seng Basotho re itse le Basotho kaofela ho tloha mona ho ya Zambia ho tloha kajeno. I would like to start my presentation, which of course is not in Sesotho, but I will try by all means to put it in Sesotho. We conceptualized this Moshoeshoe using the English language because it was conceptualized in a learning environment, which is the National University of Lesotho. So the academics were the ones who composed this concept for the purposes of driving the peace agenda among the Basotho. Bomme le bontate, among us, we have Professor Motibe, who led this process of conceptualizing this concept. And I'm here as a follower because I came after him to be the director of Moshoeshoe, the first Institute of Peace and Leadership. However, the concept is coined for the Basotho to realize the importance of their king, Morena Moshoeshoe the first. And our motto is that Morena Moshoeshoe, the cornerstone and the foundation on which Lesotho is founded. Anyone who builds on another foundation breaks the covenant and breaks away from his or her roots. Morena Moshoeshoe, wena lejwe la motheo mo Lesotho le thehilweng teng, ya ka thehang ka motheo o sele o senya dipalo, o theha ka motheo sele o roba selekane, o kgawa motsong wa hae. The National University of Lesotho, as it realized that the nation, the Basotho nation, will be celebrating 200 years of its formation in 2024. It came to its consciousness that in building the momentum for that particular celebration, when all the Basotho from all angles of the world will be celebrating their formation as a nation, it came up with this national Moshoeshoe revival campaign, coordinated by the Institute of Moshoeshoe, the first, based within the National University of Lesotho, so that we call upon all the Basotho and all nationals across the world who are peace-loving to join us as we journey towards this big occasion. So this campaign is a voluntary initiative that seeks to bring together Basotho individuals, groups, and organizations, nationally and internationally, who believe that Morena Moshoeshoe the first left a legacy of national unity, peaceful resolution of conflicts, ethical leadership, and patriotism, which should guide our national conscience, our national outlook, and our national character. This is a clarion call to all Basotho and all peace-loving nations to recommit to achieve these noble goals as we journey towards 2024. We had all hoped that when we regained our independence 54 years ago, that all of us we shall have achieved peace. As we took our own ruling from the colonial masters, we had hoped that there will be reconciliation between the ruler and the ruled. However, the current situation tells a different story. Economically, politically, socially, we are experiencing enormous challenges. Socially, we now see all forms of alienation and hostility which have emerged. For example, gender-based violence, domestic violence, use of hate speech, discrimination against minority groups and the disadvantaged groups. We are experiencing atrocities associated with Famu music, gangsterism, to name a few, which are now leaving many families in great despair. We also observe that there is moral decay among society, characterized by rising enmity and hatred. Some of our youth, like the adults, have lost direction and value for peace. They have now become enemies among themselves, even among their parents, because they are raised in disgruntled households and societies which do not uphold to the peace values of Morena Moshoeshoe the first. Economically, we can see the deterioration in our economy. Our economic plans cannot succeed because we spend much time and resources on resolving conflicts. Politically, we are now experiencing polarization because of our politics. We are now experiencing poor leadership, which does not follow Morena Moshoeshoe's ethical leadership. We are now experiencing lack of patriotism. We no more love our country and our nation because we are a divided society. These unintended circumstances which we find ourselves in now are happening in spite of the best intentions of the founder of the Basotho nation, Morena Moshoeshoe, the first of peaceful and prosperous nation. On reflecting on Morena Moshoeshoe the first, Motlotlei Moshoeshoe wa bobedi once said, Morena Moshoeshoe and others, like Makwanyane, were characterized by wisdom, bravery, dedication, steadfast, perseverance, and commitment. It is with these values that they were able to rescue Lesotho and Basotho as we are a nation. He also said, Morena Moshoeshoe the first left us a legacy of a country, a unified nation, and peace. It is with this ethos of Morena Moshoeshoe the first, which are selfless service, honesty, love, empathy, and compassion, that his leadership stood to reign. Cemu, therefore, as a campaign, aspires to instill to every person, whether we said we are all Basotho because we want to conquer almost everyone to become a Mosotho, a peaceful nation. We aspire to instill the Moshoeshoe the first principles and values and virtues and ethos through this concept. These are the very ethos and principles that define our Basotho, which are love, respect for human rights, peace, compassion, empathy, humility, solidarity, trust, honesty, participation, collaboration, independence, diplomacy, dialogue, social justice, empowerment, tolerance, and optimism. The campaign, therefore, seeks to resuscitate and instill in young and old principles and ethos inherent in Moshoeshoe. As our country and our people will embark on a journey towards 2024, which involves also the adoption of the national reforms for the Lesotho we want, we are making strong calls to all Basotho to anchor on this Moshoeshoe as we journey to the 2024 and beyond. This is the only concept we believe will ensure everlasting solutions to the Lesotho's political, security, and socio-economic problems. Therefore, we are calling all the Basotho through this concept to embrace it, because it is going to restore the Basotho nation to its former glory of the foundation of the founding father. We also aim through the campaign to revitalize our sense of the national identity and spirituality, reflecting on who we are, where we are going. It is time, Basotho, to pause and take stock, to look back in history while we look forward to the future we desire. We aim to start the conversation among Basotho from all different walks of life on Moshoeshoe the first legacy. A country where people strive their utmost best, where dedication, cooperation and collaboration, patriotism, peace among Basotho and their neighbors reign supreme. We aim also to ensure that Basotho from all different walks of life commit to being brave men and women who work towards the advancement and welfare and freedom of the Basotho nation. We also aim to search for ways of sensitizing the youth, the young generation, about their proud past and inspire them to reclaim and emulate Morena Moshoeshoe's servant leadership traits. We also aim to instill patriotism in the Basotho nation, where our people's welfare comes first, and we have the Lesotho we want. We also aim to embark on aggressive decolonization journey, which will make us proud of our Basotho and Africanness. As we journey, we have identified key drivers of this agenda. Among them are educators, leaders in all sectors of society, the Renewal and the Institute would like to work closely with chiefs who, by custodian and by law, they are the custodians of our culture and our tradition as Basotho. We also aim to work with politicians, church leaders, and their congregation. We also are going to work with traditional leaders, business women and men, and civilians, the elite, artists, children, youth, adults, everyone else. As we said, it is a call from all people around who are peace-loving. We are going to establish a mechanism that will oversee the campaign. which will be composed of all stakeholders, all sectors of society to drive this agenda. We are going also to incorporate activities which are multi-targeted to disseminate this information, which we believe it is important. We have started, and we are still going to continue to use all platforms, which I believe this is one of them. The media, social media, national celebrations, to showcase why our country is important and its people. At the end, when we shall be celebrating in 2024 and beyond, we still believe we are going to celebrate the Basotho nation. We would like to see Basotho from all formations to have maintained who they are truly. We also would like to see Basotho to embrace Botho as a social construct and philosophy. We would also like to see all schools at all levels to have committed, as we have started today, in teaching Lesotho history, Basotho norms and customs, as well as language and literature. We would also like to see all challenges facing our society and the country phased out and remaining as a united nation. We would like also to see Basotho who are re-energized and have new ethos inherent in Morena Moshoeshoe's legacy and ethos and principles, and we would like them to have sense of direction. We would also like to have documented all the Basotho history, even the activities of the allies to Morena Moshoeshoe the First. Bommel bontate ki yona tsela eo setsi sena le sekolo se seholo sa setjhaba sa thuto e phahameng Lesotho ka tshebedisano mmoho le lona le Basotho bohle mafatsheng ohle ge reng ha re ke re etseng ka Moshoeshoe ge ke re hopoleng hore na re tswa kae dikgomo Basotho ke a leboha.
Leboa Prof. Basotho sa ba utlwile hore taba e se hlaile la batleha Basotho ba Lesotho le ba ka hara South Africa la batleha. You need to go back and find your identity. You have lost your identity. You've been exposed to too much. You have lost peace. Peaceful nation of, and Prof, you ntho e buang ke nnete Basotho ke batho ba kgotso. That's why re tlameleng le ba bang kaofela le ba iseng Basotho re tlo ba go ba tshasa ka nthweng ya rona ya kgotso, so that we become one peaceful nation. As per protocol, normally when I'm the program director, I normally have a horn, like an alarm, when people speak. I know we have a lot to say to each other, but unfortunately we are live, and at a certain time the life is going to cut. So I will respect her na. Ha ke batlo tsamaya se ke kwatelane le batho ba heso kwana. Hore taba tsa ka mona ka South Africa ha se di nqakile ke tlamehile ke kgutlele hae e be ba ntebeka. Ba ga ke rona go tshwere jwang jwang ka mara. So I would just request that all of the speakers that are here just be mindful of time, and so that all what we want to say can be captured by all of our media houses that are present, and we don't lose the important message. I have seen some people were asking, I know Prof. Ngowi has said and asked what is the importance and the reason why we are embarking on this with Lesotho. One thing that can be said that it's about time. It's long overdue because of our history with Lesotho as Free State. It's not just a geographical situation. Many of the people of Lesotho are in our country, and specifically in the Free State. So this relationship was long overdue. But the important part of this memorial lecture is what has been said, to advocate the characteristics and understanding of what King Moshoeshoe was about, and to acknowledge his role that he played in resolving conflict, and give him the recognition that he deserves, as we also recognize our own heroes inside of South Africa that fought for our democracy, as he has also fought for the peace and conflict of his country. It is also to acknowledge and share the history. And Prof has said an important thing, that there is so much, this much information regarding our history. And if you have read about many people of language and to talk about culture, they will tell you about the missing part of the intergenerational. There's an intergenerational gap between those who are supposed to be responsible for teaching the others about their characteristics of King Moshoeshoe, which we are trying to close that gap through this specific lecture. It is also to find a collaboration, or a collaboration between high institutions of higher learning, and see how can we work towards finding scientific solutions to all the challenges of society, of institutions, of humanity, politics, economy, and all of those. So those are some of the concepts that brings us to this specific lecture. And now I will call upon Dr. Seli Zingwa. She is the institutional registrar here at the Central University of Technology, Free State, and she will be giving an introduction of the keynote speaker. Thank you, Doc.
Ke lebohela monyetla motsamaisi wa tshebeletso ya kajeko. Ntumelle hore ke acknowledge the Royal House and say all protocol observed. It is an honor and privilege to be the one introducing the keynote speaker for today's memorial lecture, Professor Difeto Henry Mutibe, who holds a PhD, is the 6th Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Lesotho, during whose tenure the university embarked on for the first time in its 56th existence, on an all-encompassing transformation process in order to salvage the university from self-destruction and restore its image and the role and role as a premier institution in higher education learning in Lesotho and beyond. The Strategic Plan 2002
to 2007, institutionalized the decentralized and devolved managerial system, consolidated teaching and research organs, and broke fresh ground in processing new programs and niche areas for teaching and research. As Associate Professor of History in the Department of Historical Studies and in the NUL, where he has taught, researched, and published extensively on pre-colonial and post-independence Lesotho and Zimbabwe for over 30 years. His publications include Diplomats in 19th Century Lesotho in the National University of Lesotho Research Journal, African Labor in Colonial Zimbabwe in 1950s, A Decline in Militancy or a Turn to Mass Struggle, Labor Capital Society, with the 26th version, as well as early communities of the Southern Highveld, 1500 to 1800, titled State Society, 1824 to 1833 in Nerville, W. Pule and Motlatsi Tabane editions. Essays on aspects of political economy of Lesotho, 1500 to 2002. And this was in the National University of Lesotho Department of History in 2002 with co-author M. Mushunga. The title was Lesotho and the Struggle for Liberation in South Africa, The Road to Democracy in South Africa, and this was published in UNISA Press, Volume 5, African Solidarity, Part 1 to 2013. The title of this one was Political Leadership Challenge in Lesotho, A Cause of Political Instability, in Motlatsi Tabane editions. Towards an Anatomy of Persistent Political Instability in Lesotho. This was from 1966 to 2016, National University of Lesotho, 2017. Professor Mtibe is also the founding director of the Moshoeshoe I Institute of Peace and Leadership in NUL, which was established in 2018. During his tenure, he developed a concept note of the institute leading to its establishment and concept note of National Cemu Revival Campaign, a voluntary initiative that seeks to bring consciousness of Basotho inside the country and in the diaspora. Morena Moshoeshoe's rich legacy in national unity, peace building, ethical leadership, and patriotism, in the hope of that his legacy will guide and influence individual and collective Basotho behavior, their national outlook, and their national character. He has on 2 occasions given papers on Moshoeshoe, Moshoeshoeism, its relevance to Lesotho today, at a workshop of Principal Chiefs, Basu, on the 19th of October 2018, organized by the Lesotho chapter of the UBLS Association. The second one was Moshoeshoe's view of peace, a framework of sustainable reform process, a multi-stakeholder national dialogue, which was held on the 26th to the 28th of November in 2018, and this was organized by the National Dialogue Planning Committee. He has a wide and long experience in higher education as a head of department, dean of faculty, acting vice chancellor and vice chancellor, and a member of the university councils of NUL and Copperbelt University, Zambia. He also served on a board as a board member in the International Association of Universities and UNESCO Executive Board. It is an honor and pleasure again, Program Director, to introduce Professor Tefecho Henry Mutibe. Thank you.
Ntumeleng Basotho maparakubo amatle majarafura kana letla chabasarantsho bana patisele ki bue ka Morena Moshoeshoe ki bue ka monna harabanna wa monna wa khotso morena ya senang dikgoka ba motse ba mbari ki morena wa khotso e ya ihlile ki ya dumela le nkgono mantsopa a ka mpakela ki bua ka morena moramo khashane ke re yena ntata le tsie le masopa ka bile sa hae lana tsebe le tseba ke dikono ubani ke tlo bua ka ntata Basotho ke tlo bua ka mohali haraba hali basadi di etsang le popo le khule ke bone ditshana di etse metjeko le ditolobonyang etsa menyakwe ya dipina le rorise mokopani wa khotso mokopani wa ditjhaba ntata Basotho ka bele sa hae banna bina mikorotlo le morao ho thaba bosiu eya re hle re utlwe re le mose ho sinku haile koto tsona le dipehe matsohong le ho bele le thabise morena Moshoeshoe wa pele bubeng sa tlatla matsholo ke Moshoeshoe moshwashwaila wa hakali le boela le boetseng ra bonna heng ditedu le go hola abiso hole di a sa
Director of Ceremonies, Ndumela Melenagi Ramhlanga, ki fitise ditebo le hlompho ya ka ho ntata Basotho le tsela ba gago mme ke ya ha ke shwa le ke bua ka morena wa rona pedi ya me bitso la hae ka jeno dade ke hlomphe His Excellency Decay, our High Commissioner to the Republic of South Africa, Nadia Awolewambwe. Kitlombe hape, Watlombe, heads of partner institutions, Central University of Technology, National University of Lesotho, Lesotho College of Education, Lesotho Logotori Polytechnic, and Motel College. Then to Melbourne, Melbourne date or a gire, Hagishu, gire, all protocol observed. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Kaldumidisa, Mapa Guama at Levatin Guan. The Rick Galakahori. Anagung Haganzigile, Mutua, Sconses Hulsas Chava. Lemons a hale. Yabaream, getting home Hulgina, Moshoeshoe. May in a good high, how we on Tamu. Ogana, Tamu Ilavas to do Udwani. Ilagahagan Ilim with Tutua, historians, the Gilio Alhava. Kara am Basotho, we are a diverse community. Usually, how Moshoeshoe to Ugaga, Kaufala, Pegam Mawlisi, the Basotho, one of West Coast. Keep us to Kaufala Banat one, keep us to Amagana Moshoeshoe. Gelegere, Tavazina Kaufala, Kitabazi Hulu, Secretary ready, Trogomele, ready from Bumelabondade. Qui est radicalisé au Réveil, qui est appuyé dans la race au Empire. Qui est revenu au Rétlan with it. It was the director of ceremonies which he remember Kuchayana Hall. Qui voulait les autres qui doivent voir, Ramona, qui doivent voir. Utoskawa, Warentung. Hakaton Pile, Holoba, Basia Sam Moshoeshoe. It is my singular honor and privilege to have been asked to be the first speaker in this series of Moshoeshoe, the first memorial lectures, and I wish to thank the organizers for the invitation. It is an invitation, however, that I accepted with a lot of hesitation, because the theme chosen for this lecture involves current debates on Pan-African education, namely curriculum renewal, Africanization and decolonization, areas that are currently highly contested in institutions of higher learning in South Africa in particular. I'll make my remarks on these issues in my conclusion. And I deliberately decided to do that in my conclusion, not now, lest I am taken astray. For now, let me concentrate on what issues of Moshoeshoe, which Professor Mtsweni has already alluded to, the Central University of Technology should embrace in its journey to curriculum renewal, Africanization, and decolonization. I'll start by going to the origins of the concept. We historians like that. What are the origins of Moshoeshoe? Calls for the adoption of Moshoeshoe go back to the mid-1960s in Lesotho, when Basu negotiated their independence from Britain, and all leaders looked to Moshoeshoe, and each wished to rule, or wanted to rule, wanted Basu to be ruled in accordance with Moshoeshoe's wisdom, in ways that Moshoeshoe would have approved. Leaders of Lesotho, two major political parties at that time, today we have 53 of them, of the 1960s and 1970s, devoted their time to study and write about Moshoeshoe's wisdom and his achievements. And both are credited with publications Moshoeshoeism and Moshoeshoe, in which they sought to articulate Moshoeshoe's philosophy, which they said influenced their own thinking and approach to how Basu should be ruled. We know that even King Moshoeshoe II wanted independent Lesotho to be ruled as it had been, and I quote, in the days of our illustrious ancestor, but adapting Moshoeshoe's method of rule to modern conditions, unquote. In these publications, those leaders articulated their definitions of Moshoeshoeism and Moshoeshoe. Mngana Labua Jonathan, the second prime minister, and I say the second prime minister. I know people say he was not the first prime minister. Second prime minister of the independent Lesotho defined Moshoeshoeism, quote, as the synthesis of all Moshoeshoe's enlightened thought, vision, idealism, and pragmatism, crystallized in the black citadel that is the kingdom of Lesotho, unquote. While for Mr. Nzumukhetle, the first leader of the official opposition of independent Lesotho, Moshoeshoe is, and I quote, Moshoeshoe's selflessness, his fearlessness, his power and depth of thought, his profound understanding and perpetual appreciation of man and men's relations, both in concrete and abstract, his polite but firm fatalism, his obvious lack of any adverse psychological complexes, his devastating simplicity and humility, his power of accommodation, his indestructible thirst for truth and justice, his humane sensitivity about and against man's inhumanity to man, his correct assessment of the meaning and values of events and things, and his ultra-Christian and ultra-Islamic tolerance and forbearance, all springing from his faith in Muslimism. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, what is it then that even today the Central University of Technology in Free State wants to go back to Moshoeshoe to look for ways in order to achieve curriculum renewal, Africanization, and decolonization? I think it is Moshoeshoe's rich legacy of nation building, peace building, ethical leadership, and patriotism, in the hope that this legacy will guide and influence Central University of Technology's individual and collective institutional behavior. In this lecture, I intend to talk to those four values by tracing the way Moshoeshoe and his advisors carefully saved the nation from all manner of destructive forces by means of skillful diplomacy and judicious use of force. But before I do that, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to give you an insight into the man by quoting extensively from one of his authoritative biographer, Leonard Thompson, who has produced a convincing portrait of a humane and intelligent man and a skillful and far-sighted patriot who, despite serious odds, managed to build a nation in the midst of chaos and warfare. He writes, this is long, ladies and gentlemen, but I think you'll get a sense of now who are we talking about here. And he writes, and I quote, Moshoeshoe was an African. Mr. Vice Chancellor, Moshoeshoe was an African whose life extended from the old order to the new, the traditional to the colonial. He was brought up in the interior of Southern Africa in an isolated society of mixed farmers organized in small chiefdoms. As a young man, he knew nothing of horses, of firearms, or of white people. During his 30s, Africans who had been displaced from Natal by Shaka invaded his homeland and triggered a series of catastrophes that caused bloodshed, social and political disintegration, and collapse of confidence. It was then that he emerged as a leader. This is the context. Through moral influence as much as military prowess, he rallied the survivors and built the kingdom. He had scarcely begun to do so, however, when the Western world impinged upon him, reaching out from the long-established colony of the Cape of Good Hope. In quick succession, there came armed colored horsemen plundering, French Protestant missionaries evangelizing, British officials bearing impressive presents and convincing and concocting ominous documents, and Afrikaner pastoralists appropriating land. And Afrikaner pastoralists appropriating land. For the rest of his long life, Moshoeshoe grappled with the growing and ultimately overwhelming strength of these diverse intruders. Moshoeshoe was a humane man who respected the dignity of every person and ruled by consultation and consent, and rarely imposed the death penalty. So South Africa is taken from Moshoeshoe. He was a self-disciplined and integrated personality. He abstained from drinking alcohol and smoking cannabis, for he declared that they would prevent him from making wise decisions. He was a selective innovator. I'm talking about the man now. Quick to appreciate the advantages of guns, horses, new crops, and literary education. Above all, he was a realist and a patriot. While he accepted much evangelical Christian doctrine, he had compelling social and political reasons for rejecting several aspects of the teachings presented by the missionaries. To preserve the cohesion of his people, he kept one foot in the conservative and traditionalist camp, even while placing the other in the modern and Christian. He he acquired a deep understanding of the changing power relationships in the Southern African state system of his day, and matching his policy to his means, he pursued an active diplomacy, unquote. So this is Ronald Thompson talking about Morena Moshoeshoe. And believe you me, he has captured the man from his birth until his death, and has captured all the values that you are talking about. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I decided to take Moshoeshoe and active diplomacy as a theme of this evening's Moshoeshoe's memorial lecture. And I'm going to take you through history. And I hope you'll appreciate that history is one of the most fascinating subjects, disciplines. Those of you who have never done history should go back and do history, because it's the most fascinating. Let me start from the beginning. In pre-colonial Lesotho, Moshoeshoe's enemies ranged from the violent refugee states released by the Difakani through the fugitive Boers, Coloureds and Khoikhoi, who were escaping from the British rule in the Cape Colony, to the British imperial pioneer itself, which at various times sought by both violent and peaceful means to subordinate all the peoples of the subcontinent to its interest. It was in this context of the destabilization forces that Moshoeshoe, right from the beginning, tried to establish an extensive network of diplomatic relations, which in the end encompassed the major societies in the region, stretching from Amandebele in Zimbabwe to the Amakosa, and from Botswana to the Amazulu. As one missionary observed, and I quote, delegates of all tribes in Southern Africa were to be found at Basu, the stronghold of the Basu. Central to these relations was Moshoeshoe's objectives: to build as much as possible by peaceful means a nation with a viable territorial base which enjoyed sovereignty as well as the respect of its neighbors. Following in Mhlomi's footsteps, and I should apologize that I won't go into Mhlomi because I'll take the whole evening. He looked upon war as a dangerous and limited tool to be used cautiously for achieving clearly defined, readily attainable objectives, or as a last resort, only after negotiations, conciliation, appeasement, or other tactics of diplomacy had proved unproductive. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, contrary to earlier assertions by colonial observers, there's evidence that contact between Lesotho and other African governments in the region began at the early stages of the formation of the Lesotho Kingdom in the early 1820s. A European missionary by the name of Thomas Abuse tells us that even as early as the time when Moshoeshoe left his father's village at Mengkwaneng to found his own village below Tabute Mountain, he sent 2 officers to Mbagazita, chief of Amatlubi, on a diplomatic mission. Abuse gives us an impression of that the mission was to ask for food supplies. The mandate with which it was charged said, according to Abuse, and I quote, "Our master has no more corn. Wilt thou give him some?" But the very next request suggested that the request for corn was only a cover-up for what was otherwise a peace embassy. The mission was mandated with the request, quote, "Wilt thou allow my subjects to mingle freely with thine," unquote. The nyehelo, or tribute, of 2 oxen that were sent by Moshoeshoe to Mbagazita also indicated that the mission was an embassy charged with negotiating peace. It was in pursuit of peace that Moshoeshoe entered into a number of alliances with other chiefs as he built the Basotho nation. The first chief with whom he sought an alliance was Morena Letuli Omamkhaba. Quote, the meeting was held at Futani, and Moshoeshoe's words, as repeated by his ambassadors, were as follows. Letuli, thou art Mosotho. I am also Mosotho. Enemies draw near. Let us therefore unite. Unquote. Moshoeshoe offered to submit to Letuli because, as he put it, of Letuli's superior status and numbers of his followers. But the old man, recognizing Moshoeshoe's leadership qualities, refused, instead, defer to him. Under this alliance, quote, each ruler would remain autonomous, but they would cooperate against aggressors, and in so doing, they would act under the leadership of Morena Moshoeshoe, unquote. Moshoeshoe repeated the strategy he used in forming an alliance with Letuli with the chiefs of Bataung and Babut. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Moshoeshoe's superior diplomatic qualities and acumen sparkled most brilliantly during his dealings with the Mfekane refugee plunderers. Whenever possible, he stabbed off their pillages by offering them tribute. When the Ngwane of Matiwani attacked the Basotho in 1822, for example, Moshoeshoe sent a nyehelo of cattle in the hope of avoiding conflict. But the Ngwane army killed Moshoeshoe's envoys and stole the tribute and more cattle. Moshoeshoe, however, persisted by sending a second tribute, accompanied by a request that he be made a subject of Matiwani in exchange for protection. Matiwani accepted this act of humiliation by Moshoeshoe and called him Musotwana. To win his own people to this unusual act, Morena Moshoeshoe explained that since Matiwani could have easily taken all the cattle, submission saved the lives as well as the cattle. This was perhaps the first instance of diplomatic skill that Morena Moshoeshoe displayed and was to display most of his lifetime, and thereby enabled him to ride out the storms that came his way. Later, when Moshoeshoe had moved to Basu and his relations with Matiwani deteriorated, he tipped the local balance of power in his favor by establishing tributary relations with Shaka, the king of Amazulu. He sent gifts that he knew would please Shaka, such as feathers of ostriches, cranes, finches for his troops, and jackal skins, all in an effort to secure Shaka's support against Matiwa. For his part, Shaka reciprocated Moshoeshoe's gifts by sending back to him with the embassy 50 head of cattle, 50 head of cattle, the assurance of non-aggression, as well as protection against Matiwa. You see the old man. One thing to note here, ladies and gentlemen, is the unequal value of Moshoeshoe's gifts to Shaka's cattle. It would seem that rather than see Moshoeshoe as a vassal, Shaka saw him as an important stabilizing force in the high field, and therefore an ally worthy of respect. Once these diplomatic exchanges were started, Moshoeshoe kept them alive by sending periodic embassies to Shaka, which were reciprocated. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Basotho contact with Europeans marked a period of increasing involvement in the wider world of colonial and imperial expansion. The wider was culminated in the colonization of Lesotho by the British in 1868. At the heart of these wars that were to dominate the relations between Lesotho on the one hand and the Boers and the British on the other was land, and more land. And in as far as the Boers were concerned, when they came in, Moshoeshoe never regarded them as an entity with which to open official diplomatic relations. He regarded them merely as passers-by and made this exceedingly clear in his dealings with them and in his dispatches to the colonial authorities at the Cape. In giving them permission to rest in his country temporarily, Moshoeshoe warned them that he regarded them as travelers and that they should not regard as their property lands he had allowed them to reside on. This is very important, That is why, when he heard of the pioneering settlement of Jan de Wiener, he issued a circular warning the Boers that, and I quote, "The ground on which they were belonged to me, but that I had no objections to their flocks grazing there till such time as they were able to proceed further. On condition, however, that they remained in peace with my people and recognized my authority." On condition that they remained in peace with my people and recognized my authority, unquote. When he realized that the Boers had ignored the circular, instead went ahead to exchange and sell among themselves farming places and fountains, and that some began to build substantial houses, he issued the following proclamation, and I quote, "Moshoeshoe, the paramount chief of the Basu, having visited the western parts of his territory, finds it necessary to make known the following among the Boers, residing between the Orange and the Caledon rivers, to the junction of these rivers, as well as beyond the Caledon near the border of Betule and around the school farm of Beersheba, that all purchases and sales already made or under the process of being made of farms, springs, houses, kraals, and other immovable structures contrary to our laws and customs are therefore null and void. We notify that those who are proposing to acquire property in our land under the pretext of purchase expose themselves to the laws of money," unquote. When he gave this on the 29th of October 1844. I'm capturing the man himself. In addition, Moshoeshoe at no time did he regard the Boers as an independent community. Quote, "In his eyes, the Afrikaners were not patriots throwing off the oppressor's yoke, but misguided subjects rejecting their lawful sovereign, or to use his own words, children running away from their father." Unquote. Therefore, everything that concerned the children had to be referred to their father at the Cape. He made this point very clearly in his reply to a letter from Commandant General A.W. Pretorius, and I quote, "I look upon His Excellency the Governor as the protector and Commander-in-Chief of all the whites in South Africa. And on that point, I obtained information from the Boers themselves. For the first time I met the Boers in my country, they told me they were the subject of the King of England, whose representative resides in Cape Town," unquote. He was to come back to the central theme when he acknowledged Governor Sir H.G. Smith's letter of the 23rd March 1848, and I quote, "Ever since the Boers made their appearance in this country, I have reminded them of their duty to their government. and refused to treat them as an independent community, conscious that sooner or later they will be subject to the inquiry and the arrangements of their lawful sovereign. I have endeavored to live at peace with them and to do them good, trusting Her Majesty's government would not overlook the interest of my people. Unquote. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, what the above quotation clearly shows is that Moshoeshoe's diplomatic overtures with the colonial government did not have anything to do with some mysterious fear and awe of the power of the Queen of England. He simply considered the colonial government as the official and rightful power to deal with in his relations with the Boers. He's a historian manad. But when the British, following the wars of 1851 and 1858, are moving very fast now towards the colonization, granted self-rule to the Boers north of Lekwa River under the Sand River Convention, which would lead to the birth of Orange Free State, a free and autonomous state on the borders of Lesotho. Through the Bloemfontein Convention of 1854, Moshoeshoe adopted a pragmatic stance, and you'll see why he did that. Although the terms of both the Sand and Bloemfontein Conventions were detrimental to Lesotho's interests, in that they not only negated the alliances that the British had entered into with Moshoeshoe, they also declared that the Free State would be able to buy ammunition in all British territories while prohibiting such a trade with the Basu. As if that was not enough betrayal by the British, the Bloemfontein Convention had a remarkable omission. This omission, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, it said nothing about the boundary between Lesotho and the Orange Free State. It said nothing about the boundary between the two countries. The above notwithstanding, Moshoeshoe accepted the new reality of the birth of the Orange Free State on his doorstep with the hope in time relations would improve. Alas, that was not to be, as land continued to constitute the primary cause of tension and frosty relations between the two states. The situation was, however, temporarily mitigated when J.P. Hoffman, a long-time friend of Morena Moshoeshoe, was elected the first president of the Free State. Moshoeshoe had high regard for Hoffman, not only as a friend, but most importantly, he hoped with Hoffman at the helm in the Free State, relations between the two states were bound to grow from strength to strength because, and I quote, this gentleman, by his many years of experience, is intimately acquainted with our laws and customs, of which he can only avail himself, but enlighten his fellow members by that experience, unquote. Let me inform most of you who don't know. When you get to on top of the tower, and you see a house, in a square, Hoffman. It was built by Hoffman himself. So they were very, very good friends. He went on to underline that, quote, from the experience of the past, hints may be derived regarding what has been beneficial and what, on the contrary, has caused trouble and disputes, whereby we may cultivate the former and avoid the latter, unquote. Hence, when he was invited to Bloemfontein on the occasion of the inauguration of the new government, Hoffman, in August 1854, Morena Moshoeshoe gladly attended. Arriving with an escort of 100 men, which include, Your Excellency, his sons Sihonyana, Masupa, and Majara, And you know the reasons why he brought those here. Moshoeshoe, in a memorial address to the members of the Free State False Rat, I think it is called False Rat, stressed the hope that they would live in peace. Quote, I still confidently hope that the land will be properly governed and peace maintained. If the rulers regulate their proceedings on principles of uprightness and truth, aiming at agreement among themselves and peace with their neighbors, unquote. He was to reply to Hoffman's speech by expressing his desire, again I quote, since I've had the pleasure of paying you a visit, that I may receive a visit after the 27th instant from one or more members of your government, unquote. Indeed, a month later, Hoffman, accompanied by 4 field cornets and 2 justices of peace, fulfilled Moshoeshoe's desire by visiting Basu and spending 4 days where they had long discussions with Moshoeshoe in the presence of his councillors and his kinsmen, including the Decay the First. And ladies and gentlemen, it was this visit that would lead to the fall of Hoffman. Indeed, when he returned, he was forced to resign. With the forced resignation of Hoffman in February 1855, the coming into power of J.N. Boshoff as president of the Orange Free State, and the arrival in the Cape Colony of Sir George Grey as the British High Commissioner and Governor of the Cape, relations between Lesotho and the Orange Free State were to reach their lowest ebb, resulting in a war of 1858. In this war of 1858, where the Boers suffered a bloody nose from the Basotho, was marked a milestone. But it was in the midst of that war, which Basotho finally won, that Boshoff wrote to Moshoeshoe, and I quote, "Great Chief, we've now nearly 2 months at war. Much blood has been shed and injury inflicted on both sides. As a man and a Christian, I would wish to see an end to ruin and destruction of life." This was Boshoff, the second president of the Free State. What do you think Moshoeshoe would do? As a man of his principles, who had his people at heart at all times, Moshoeshoe resisted any temptation to flout his success in his victory by responding as follows, quote, "However, my name is Moshoeshoe, and my sister is called Peace. I've never liked war in my youth. How could I like it now that I'm old?" Unquote. Unfortunately, Moshoeshoe's sincere views of peace were not reciprocated by Brand, the successor of Boshoff as president of the Orange Free State, who in 1865, in tones reminiscent of his predecessor, asserted that there was, quote, "no other ways of securing the blessing of peace with the Basotho but through the means of war," unquote. Consequently, wars that were fought in the 1860s, the Boers had distinct advantages over the Basotho, because the former were able to purchase guns and ammunition freely from the Cape Colony and Natal, in accordance with the provisions of the Bloemfontein Convention, while the latter were prohibited. Moreover, Marana Moshoeshoe was almost 80 years, while the Boers were led by a younger Brand. In these wars of dispossession, Lesotho lost about 2/3 of its arable land, but was saved from annihilation when again Marana Moshoeshoe successfully appealed for British protection in 1868. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the protected state status marked the consummation of Morena Moshoeshoe's active diplomatic endeavors, which assured the survival of the Basotho nation. The mild colonial status he extracted, and mark the words that I've used, he extracted from the British guaranteed that his kingdom escaped some of the horrors that attended colonies of white settlement. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Director of Ceremonies, I've now come to a conclusion. And I want to go back to the issues that I raised. I'll be very brief here. In conclusion, Bomele Bondati, today more than ever, Africans need to look back in order to go forward. But what do Africans see when they look back? They are often overwhelmed by seeing mainly the destructive 500 years plus of the dehumanizing African experience. They rarely acknowledge, appreciate, recognize, and promote the positive and constructive African knowledge, heritage, and contribution that the African ancestors created before the period of destruction. The current education system hardly recognizes that this rich knowledge and science and technology heritage ever existed. They are hardly included in the curriculum. The management of the 4 or 5 institutions, please listen to this carefully. It is about time to appreciate this positive heritage or data and include it systematically in the curriculum of all African schools as well as colleges and universities. The demand for change, to change the education policy in Africa often receives a lukewarm reception. This closed approach has to change in order to include the African knowledge heritage and to design new models that prevent dependence and encourage creativity and innovation by African learners and students. The negative narrative emanating from the destructive period should be changed. It is thus very essential that knowledge production is built on the foundation and values that Africans have left behind. We believe that, though it is long overdue, it is about time Africans must hurry to reclaim the positive and constructive heritage, to anchor the African education system on the following 4 foundations. 1, the constructive and positive heritage must be resurrected and serve to educate and win generations of Africans, starting with children from kindergarten and going up to tertiary level. 2, they must go beyond it and fully become Africans with pride, dignity, self-reliance, self-confidence, freedom, and independence. 3, the African future should be built both with the imagination and with knowledge of the constructive history and heritage left behind by our ancestors, and also by learning and overcoming the remaining risks and dangers from the legacy of the destructive period. The future is made by appreciating and learning from the constructive and destructive African history and heritage. The Pan-African education system must capture critically both the heritage and the future. 5thly, Pan-Africanism and African Renaissance, as 2 in 1 together, must provide the foundation and defining meta-narrative for the rethinking, redesigning, re-engineering the whole African education system. We must find ways of using all the learning materials and languages and social sciences, both on physical and online platforms. Ways must be found to promote the Pan-African education system across the African world without excluding anyone, by making sure all are encouraged, invited, and welcomed. Finally, the reason why we must resurrect the positive heritage, history, and data is that African past contains rich resources of knowledge that are highly relevant for today and tomorrow. Knowledge that all Africans must be exposed to, learn, and grow up with. This can be achieved by systematically putting African knowledge and values in the curriculum. To be sure, among many of Madam Moshoeshoe's legacies that he bequeathed us was education. In it, he saw many benefits, including the fact that through education, his beloved Lesotho language would be preserved. Thus, on seeing his words written down and represented by letters of the alphabet, he told the missionary, and I quote, "My language remains my language on paper. If the paper came from some remote corner of the Maluti, and if it arrived by itself at Basu, it would be recognized as a Moshoeshoe, and would ask if it had been written by one of the subjects of Mugotedi," unquote. I thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Before you sit down, Prof. I would like you to come here just to get a gift of appreciation before anything else. I would also please would like to call the registrar and the acting vice chancellor to hand over and take a picture with you with your gift. Yes, it was needed. Before I give over to my colleague, Prof, you said a lot, and I now understand why Basotho ba re Free State ke naha ya bona. They always say that. This is our land. You can't say that I'm in the Free State and then you want to say I'm in another land. I'm still in Lesotho. And today, Prof understood what we said. The young generation of today, I'm at 2000, they say that you understood the assignment. It means that you brought the history as it's supposed to be done. And you said go do history so that they understand. And I think it's correct for institutions of higher learning. You can't be an academic and use wrong referencing. Your speech was needed, Prof, for us, especially for the academic sphere, as a way of referencing correctly the history of Lesotho and the history of us who are here in the Free State, and we are still confused to be foreigners in our land. You are correct to say that history is needed so that we can memorize and understand the events of our ancestors correctly, as they are supposed to be understood. Your speech today brought some sort of rectification to the confusion of history of the Basotho that we are told by those who have heard it and those who are telling their version of events. You have touched on so many things regarding decolonization and how we should approach it. And I think, as you were saying, it's still contested, and the confusion is that how do we infuse our own identity, our own culture, not translated, but as pure as it is, into the education system and what we want to teach our children. Because in today's world, some parts of our culture is seen as unhuman, seen as not clean. And those are the parts that we need to bring. You have also clarified the fact that what is religion and what is culture and how do they come together? Because in today's world, the two are confused and they seem to be two worlds that are apart. Those who will do the vote of thanks will obviously say that, for me, I hope the next person who's going to do in the next year must do better. They must go upper than you. They must go higher and tell us more about the history that is needed. Thank you, colleagues. Dr. Mkhampanya.
Yo, Prof, thank you so much. I would like to say that, Prof Kinewi, thank you. How no buale rona we say sekwele Basotho. A re sekwele Basotho, ha re sekwele Basotho go khutlela mekgweng ya lona. Khutlelang thutong eo morena Moshoeshoe a le hodisitseng ka yona. Ga le bua Prof. Ha ke tla ho Prof. Prof we say history is critical. How sa tsebe mo tswang teng, ha ona tseba mo yang teng. Ka hona ha ke dikopa a re sekwele Basotho, ha re sekwele o re khutlela mo le tswang le tle le tsebe mo le yang teng. Le ha o itse go bohloko go reta history go go tlusa bohloko, empa go betere ha o tseba mo tswang teng gobane o tla tseba mo yang teng. O itse le limi la hae morena Moshoeshoe, ha o no bua history ya hae mo a re le limi la hae le skebela dilutwa ke maleme a mang. Ha re be motlotlo ka puo ya rona. Ha o bua ka decolonization, re ruta bana ka puo efeng, ba utlwisisa eng. Ga le bua lectures like this one, it makes us to think twice of people who formed this nation, with the characters, the wisdom that they have put in Basotho. Let us be proud of Moshoeshoe. Ha re se kopitseng dintho tsa batho ba bang, ha re kgutlele morao re etseng history ya rona. Ke a leboha la ke se buisa letsatsi ho hang. Professor Dipilwani Putsisi is the principal of Muteo College, that is our TVET college. Mosebetsi wa hae a tlo etsa wa tseba o tlo tswela pele lecturing ena e ntse re fumana. Prof, ga o amohela. Prof.
Ho motsamaisi wa letsatsi lena le matsholo go boholong marena ka kakaretso, morena Mopedi, Ho Basotho kaofela, ke a le dumedisa. My duty this evening is to introduce the respondent to this wonderful history that we received this evening. Prof, we have really learned a lot. And this was really a challenge to the entire audience in this room. Le ho Basotho kaofela. Let me read the profile of Dr. Molebohe Mohapi. She is currently working as the director of Ditsong National Museum for Natural History, formerly known as Transvaal Museum, which forms part of Ditsong Museums of South Africa. This portfolio includes oversight over Ditsong Tswaying meteorite crater, a site museum with one of the best preserved meteorite craters in the world. Mayor Mohapi is also responsible for management of public programs for the entire Ditsong Museums of South Africa. She has over 10 years experience in heritage management. Her most recent appointment before joining DMSA was at Robben Island Museum, where she occupied the position of Senior Manager Heritage and Research. Prior to joining Robben Island Museum, Dr. Mohapi worked at Royal Bafokeng Administration, where she established RBA's first Arts and Culture Department. She was previously head of the Department of Historical Studies at National University of Lesotho, where she introduced the first archaeology courses. Dr. Mohapi is a woman of stature who started her career as a history and English teacher. We're talking history teachers here. She branched into archaeology in her first postgraduate studies, where she developed interest in Middle Stone Age, lithic technology, as well as change and variability in the Middle Stone Age of South Africa. Let me introduce to you the woman of stature, woman of noble character, a woman of integrity, a woman who has made contribution to history. Madam, over to you. We're going to listen to you responding to the keynote address in this august occasion. Over to you.
Thank you so much, program directors. Thank you for the introduction. Ke qale ka ho ikamanya le ditumediso tse entsweng ke dumedisa morena Mopedi le bohle ba tsamayang le yena, ke dumedise bahlomphehi bohle ba ka hare ho ntlo ena, ka ho fetisa ke dumedise my former teacher Professor Mutibe, and I also see another teacher who taught me at high school level, Me Makadika. She probably doesn't remember me. Let me start first by commending the organizers of this inaugural Moshoeshoe 1 Memorial Lecture for organizing an occasion of this magnitude. It is an honor to have been asked to be a respondent to Professor Mutibe's keynote speech on the topic, Embracing the Moshoeshoe, Philosophy to Advance Curriculum Renewal, Africanization and Decolonization. Professor Mutibe was my first lecturer of history at the National University of Lesotho, and so to be asked to be his discussant gives me great pleasure and honor. Tate Mutibe, I still remember what you said on our very first class, H101. You asked us, what does history do to you? How does it make you feel? Those were the words that you said. How does it make you feel? I still remember. I was only 18. Professor Mutibe's talk highlighted many positive values which describe the type of person King Moshoeshoe the first was. King Moshoeshoe is portrayed as a selfless man who was kind and humane and who put the interests of his nation first. He's described as a leader who demonstrated ethical leadership at all times, a patriotic leader who built the Basotho nation through peaceful means and superior diplomacy. Professor Mothibe spent a considerable amount of time providing examples of Moshoeshoe's diplomatic endeavors throughout his leadership tenure. King Moshoeshoe was always willing to submit to those who threatened the independence of his people. He was not egotistical at all. He would only use war after exhausting all peaceful means of dealing with a problem. King Moshoeshoe ruled through consultation and consent. In his book entitled Survival in Two Worlds, Leonard Thompson cites an incident where King Moshoeshoe called a pitso, or community gathering, to inform his people that him and one of his wives were getting divorced. This was as a result of the wife converting to Christianity and the faith being against polygamy. He, however, indicated to the men at the pitso that while he was divorcing the wife, it was actually the wife divorcing him, he expected them to continue availing themselves to plow the divorced wife's fields, kamatsima, as this privilege was accorded to the king's wives. According to Thompson, the men refused to continue plowing the divorced wife's fields and told Moshoeshoe that he must decide where he stands. Moshoeshoe accepted this view. He was not a despot. He erred and he accepted this view, that we're not going to plow your divorced wife's fields. This example also shows that King Moshoeshoe was always willing to maintain social cohesion amongst his people at all times. He embraced both the conservatives or traditionalists, as Professor Mothibe indicated in his address. He also embraced modernists who had converted to Christianity. While he obviously appreciated the benefits that came with Christianity and was instrumental in bringing the Paris evangelical missionaries to his nation, he refused to convert to Christianity. This decision is viewed by many as his way of avoiding to be associated with a certain grouping amongst his people. He sought advice of missionaries such as Eugene Casalis, whom he used greatly in communicating with whites. He appreciated literary education, but he also understood his responsibility to those who refused to embrace Christianity and stood in their African beliefs and customs, and stood firm in their African beliefs and customs. The decision to continue advocating for support of a wife who was leaving him also speaks to Moshoeshoe's values of Ubuntu or Ubuntu. One would expect Moshoeshoe to be hostile to the wife who was divorcing him, but he still felt responsible for her welfare. I wish today's men could take I just wish they could take this example and think about their children when they divorce their wives. This was not the only instance of King Moshoeshoe's demonstration of a deep sense of Ubuntu or Ubuntu. He's known to have forgiven cannibals who devoured his grandfather, Pete. In dealing with this horrific incident, he's said to have said that the cannibals represented the grave of his grandfather and therefore their lives should be spared. He performed rituals on them, gave them cattle and land, and ordered them to stop their barbaric ways. Ntate Mothibe we say, na lo utlwa monate wa history na. You know, lo utlwa monate wa history. The decision to continue advocating, where am I? In the spirit of today's topic, which covers issues of Africanism, If only leaders of Africa and African communities could learn from this great leader and adopt his values as a moral compass which guides them when confronted with challenges. If Africans opted for unity before violence and avoided condemnation of fellow Africans, we would not have to deal with societal ills such as xenophobia and gender-based violence. If African leaders were to adopt lessons of ethical leadership learned from Moshoeshoe and some of his contemporaries, such as Cemu of the Bafokeng Nation, Africa would not grapple with the high levels of corruption experienced today. The African Union's Strategic Development Goal 8 speaks of a united Africa. This unity can only be achieved through embracing the philosophies of Botho, or Ubuntu, which Moshoeshoe stood for. Letseka 2011 defines Ubuntu as, I quote, a form of human engagement that allows for critical thinking, non-domination, and the optimal development of human relationships. Ubuntu means that each individual's humanity is ideally expressed in relationship with others. Ubuntu is then to be aware of one's own being, but also of one's duties towards one's neighbor. On the subject of curriculum renewal and decolonization of education, I want to consider education in formal settings such as schools and tertiary institutions, as well as education which takes place in cultural institutions such as museums and science centers. Museums are included because not only are they institutions which are responsible for conservation of heritage, but many museums produce knowledge through research of their collections. This knowledge is disseminated to the public through the narratives shared by guides in these museums, as well as exhibitions and public program activities. The museum which I work for, which is called the Museums of South Africa, has as one of its outcomes in its strategic document, enhanced contribution to knowledge production within the heritage sector through disseminated research that is inclusive and relevant. The National Museum of Natural History has an in-house peer-reviewed journal which has been in print for 112 years. The Ditsung Cultural History Museum also has a research journal. These examples provide evidence of the role that museums play in knowledge production and education. Decolonization of education starts with accepting that indeed the current education system at most institutions is still colonial in nature. According to Professor Robert van Niekerk of Rhodes University, a typical South African university is predominantly white and male-led, with most black people occupying low-ranking or menial jobs. The administrative structures like Senate and Council of most of these universities are still predominantly white-dominated, and I add, they serve the interests of white supremacy. The notion of decolonization of education, especially in the context of Africa, is based on the fact that education is very intentional on what outcome it seeks to achieve. Colonial education was intended to inculcate in the minds of the oppressed or colonized that they were inferior, stupid, and could only serve the master or colonizer. Rudock 2018 argues that without understanding, and I quote, without understanding the sources of the knowledge that we acquire or whose interests that knowledge serves, we risk becoming pawns to tyrants. I have to repeat this. Without understanding the sources of the knowledge that we acquire or whose interests that knowledge serves, we risk becoming pawns to tyrants. Njairu Kulundu Bolas, a researcher from Rhodes University, adds that colonialists developed a governance structure and a knowledge system which enforced the idea of some being inferior to others, a system that was intended to raise others over the other. So many years into democracy, South Africa and many other African countries continue to teach the same curriculum which was taught during the colonial period. It is against this background that the Rhodes Must Fall movement emerged at UCT, followed by the Feast Must Fall movement at Wits and other South African universities. The campaigns sought to decolonize education through student protests. The students demanded curriculum change from a Eurocentric, racist, and sexist knowledge at untransformed institutions. They also demanded free education. They wanted an overhaul of the education system and curriculum with a system that would enable them to express their Africanness. FATA 2018 indicates that decolonizing education is based on the inclusion of all knowledge forms, including the African indigenous knowledge. Professor Mutibe alluded to how much knowledge there is to share from Africa, including the African indigenous knowledge, Arab Islamic knowledge, Chinese knowledge, etc. And I quote, "This all-inclusive approach to knowledge is based on an intercultural understanding of multiple and heterodox forms of being human." The notion of excluding other forms of knowledge in any context means that the educator is reluctant to recognize the other person. And as Rudock argues, and I quote, "He who is reluctant to recognize me opposes me." This is why education must be decolonized. As indicated before, the Ubuntu or Botho values which were expressed by Moshoeshoe in many instances show that he considered the other person as equally worthy. This should apply in our daily lives, particularly in the education sector. The topic of decolonization of education reminds me of a discussion we once had with a white professor at Wits University when I was a student. We were discussing Wits University's graduation protocols, which prohibited ululations during graduation ceremonies. I don't know whether they still have the same policy. We, the black students, complained to the professor about this. And his response was that we need to understand that we're in a white institution and therefore have to abide by the rules of the institution. There was no consideration of the diversity of the student body at Wits. As indicated previously, the need to decolonize knowledge is also applicable to museums as producers and disseminators of knowledge. Many museums are not transformed, and their collections and research activities are indicative of this fact. As somebody who leads a museum, I want to tell you that, if museum leaders are not intentional in whom they employ, we would employ all white people. Because they are privileged, they've always been privileged. When they compete with black people, of course they win all the time. They are privileged. So one has to be very intentional in dealing with this transformation. Many museums are not transformed, and their collections and research activities are indicative of this fact. In her publication entitled "Navigating Through a Colonial Space," Semi-Marx site in post-apartheid South Africa, Gertrude Siabela criticizes the Ditsong Semi-Marx Museum for not being inclusive and transformed in its narrative. She indicates that the narrative of the Semi-Marx Museum completely ignores the role that was played by black servants who helped to build Semi-Marx's legacy, but focuses on portraying Semi-Marx as an astute businessman who achieved great things, yet the labor that he used to achieve this was predominantly black. This criticism has prompted the management of Ditso Museums of South Africa to consider conducting an analysis of the narrative and collections of the 8 museums forming DMSA. The end result of this analysis will be a review of narratives, exhibitions, and public programs of these museums to be representative of all members of society. Du Plessis 2021 argues that schools and universities represent a microcosm of society. Thus, decolonization of such institutions is integral in the broader transformation of society. If we don't start at universities, if we don't start at centers of learning, if we don't start at museums, the society will continue to be untransformed. She further indicates that colonizers have used education as a means to maintain control, therefore colonized knowledge must be disbanded, as it continues to be used as a means to undermine indigenous people. Leadership should be the cornerstone of such transformation. If leaders don't do it, who's going to make them do it? Leaders, both at institution level as well as government level, need to take bold decisions to influence change. We need leaders who are prepared to take bold decisions of the nature that Claudie Motsoeneng took when he decided that all SABC radio stations and TV stations should play 90% South African music. While I do not want to argue about the legitimacy or advantages or disadvantages of such a move, for the first time in the history of South Africa, local music got first recognition over American music. Decolonization of education requires that the bearers of knowledge document it in writing so that there are source documents for those willing to renew their curriculum. I was happy to hear Prof say that you are busy recording customs and all social ways of doing things. It made me happy. There are legitimate complaints in the literature that some lecturers wanting to include IKS in their teachings fail to find teaching material. I therefore implore all of us academics gathered in this room to document indigenous knowledge and publish it. My supervisor used to say, my PhD supervisor used to say, if you do not publish Mulewe, where are they going to find it? It will sit in your study and it will gather dust. Nobody will know about it. If we fail to produce textbooks and articles detailing our African knowledge, that the status quo will remain. There's so much knowledge Africa has to share with the rest of the world. Professor Mutibe said so. I want to conclude with a quote from Du Plessis which says, I quote, "At the heart of decolonization of education is understanding that a shift from Western or Eurocentric individualism and universalism to an Ubuntu-infused African-centered curriculum does not necessitate the destruction of dominant knowledge systems, but rather demands a recentering or integration of African knowledge systems into dominant epistemological discourses." King Moshoeshoe I was always inclusive, and he was tolerant and accommodating of others, as indicated in Professor Mutibe's address. Basu always talked about how he disliked discrimination of others, hence the common quoting of an expression which he is said to have said, apparently he used to say this a lot. Loosely translated, never use derogatory language to refer to others who are not Basotho. He would have wanted every member of society to be accorded the same recognition and respect that others enjoyed. And I believe that he would have wanted this knowledge base to be incorporated in the education system of his people. Thank you. Ke a leboha.
Oh, thank you so much, Doc. Dr. Muleboy, I'm very sorry that I have to ask you to come to the podium again. And I will call upon again our acting VC and registrar to come and just thank Dr. Muleboy for the lecture that she has given to us. Hansa atamela le baholo ba ka ba ntse ba atamela go tla go nna ga leboa difoto ke tseo. Doc, thank you so much for the lecture that you have given it to us. And as I was just sitting there, I was listening to all your quotes. And I was asking myself, where is the African surname is going to come from the speech? Because everything was from Duplessis. Where is Mukhampanyani there? I think Letseka was the only one, wasn't it? So it means we are still behind. That is why we are saying this lecture is really critical, especially for us researchers. What are we researching on? Which are the topics? Which are the ideas? Which are the things that we want the world to know about us? How sa tsebe mo tswang teng, ha ona ho tseba mo yang teng. Doc, this is a challenge, especially to the language people. I might exclude myself, but I will try to collaborate with them, because we need to preserve what is ours. We thank you so much. And it shows that really you went through Batubama. Prof, thank you so much for teaching Dr. Muleboy. Mema Kadika, can need school Sarona has mahala. So we thank you so much, Rabona, the product, and can need Dr. Mulete. We have to find that journal. What's about Harry publisher? Who tata publisher? Honkana kweke publisher an article. Joale, rebonu hore wa tseba ke nna se ke tla ka di languages nga ke tsebe baba. So ke bone what there is a journal. Can't we thank you so much. This lecture is eye opener. This lecture, it makes us to be proud of being ourselves. And now I'm so proud to be called Moshoeshoe. And Cemu will continue. Moshoeshoe is going forward. By so saying, for now, ke tlotla ke kopa Menthabi saying Mobe from College of from Lesotho College of Education. Hore fela Menthabi saying atlo atlo handle the questions and interactions. Mona mori eni e ka wena ho tlo tshisa wena. And ka nnete re kopa le botsa dipotso as much as you want to. Ha o mong o na le batho bana ba babedi ba tlo thusa gore ba o nkele dipotso but wena o tla facilitate the interaction. Thank you, Ma'am Leboy. You need to say. Thank you. Thank you.
Bommel bontate ke kopa hore le ntumelle ke dumedise marena rona teng ka kwano ya ga ke qetile go tšho jalo be se ke re hle le ntumelle ebe ke hlomphile bohle ba lokelang ke hlomphe jalo e se ka tloa ka e loba ke fuwe mosebetsi o ke nahanang o bobebe haholo but o ka nnang wa ntsietsa ha le ka ske la mamela kopo eo mme a qetang ho e etsa ya hore hle le botse dipotso ke tla fellwa but I trust in you ke bone the interest with which you've been listening to the lectures, and I'm sure that this is going to go very well. For Melbourne, may I therefore open the floor to discussions for us to raise questions and for us to actually answer what Ma'am Happy was asked. What is history doing to you today?
Sorry. Like I've said before, guests, let's keep our questions very brief and straight to the point, so that everybody has an opportunity to give a comment and also do that. And if you have asked one question, our guests are still here after this for you to do further interactions so that we give equal opportunity to everybody. And that's how I'm going to do it. I thank you. I will note their hands, and then they will go in that order. You will be first. We'll just want to take 2 rounds. I am program director in charge. So if I say you go left, you go left. First, 2, 4, 5. We have 5 for this round, so it will be me there, and then sir, and then me there, and then that there, and that there. And then that day I will recognize you in the second, so that we don't overload the mill. You may start here.
Thank you, Program Director. Yeah. My question. Is it on? Can you hear me? Is it? Can you hear me?
Come this way.
Program Director, thank you very much, and we believe that this is a very prestigious event. And we see that the House is very full of honorable people. But we'd like to know from the side of the student, what does this collaboration mean to us in terms of the 5 institutions that have gathered in this House? Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I would like to pass my emotional greetings the Vice Chancellors and the entire House. My name is, sorry? Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Mangani Bulawa, SRC President of the College, and I would like to apologize for arriving late. I passed my greetings to the dignitaries who are gathered in this place. I have 3 questions. I had 4 questions initially, but I'm going to cut them. Yeah, number 1, I want to understand from Mayor Dr. Molebue, which measures are in place in order for us to protect these cultural sites that are storing our history at all material costs. For example, what we saw that transpired in the Parliament of South Africa, whereby the Parliament had to ban. A ban of a building is not what worries us, but what was inside the building is what worries the South Africans. But for the point of Lesotho, what is in place in order for us to protect those cultural sites that are having the history of our countries? The other question is that how can we best apply the decolonized education without infringing on the colonial people? Because now, what I've noticed, when we apply decolonization, we focus more on us, those who are economically disadvantaged, but infringing on other people. What are the best ways so that we can accommodate these 2 groups? My last question is that how do we refine our history? Because most of the history that is written in the museums is written by the colonists, on our behalf. Because if you can, let me say, the history of Moshoeshoe, you can find that the history of Moshoeshoe is written by a certain white man who didn't know Moshoeshoe deeper. And we have people with indigenous knowledge, the kings. Obviously, when you're a king, you carry the institutional or that rooted traditional knowledge. How do we refine their knowledge and make sure that we capture it on documents, and how do we write our own culture or books as flags? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nathan.
I'm thinking of declining because I feel like my question is going to be irrelevant, or rather I'm supposed to be the one answering the question that I was going to ask.
Let me give respect to Professor Kibe, Professor Fadi, Dr. Jimba, and Adeno Ramati. I'm Landra Anthony, former SRC, former President, amongst others. My question is one and to the point, like you said. A business without a beginning is like a man waiting for the woman really down. So by so saying, I'm saying one thing and only answering questions for you, that here is an authentic research done about Moshoeshoe as a fourth senior degree about the boundary and what should be done. So I think from here you are going to give a direction of what you do with this as your life. That's the first. Two, I was expecting a meeting of this nature to also pass a memorandum of understanding concerning the soul. That any person aspiring to be the leader of the mountain kingdom should at least have a crash course of not less than 6 months about Moshoeshoe. The reason being simple. You heard Professor Mchibe himself when he was saying in Lesotho, there are 53 parties. I can tell you one thing, most of those people know nothing about Moshoeshoe. So if we are going to be serious, we have to come with those decisions that channel people the way we want them to do. Madam, I'm trying to say, I have so many. I don't want to take more than is necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stefan, can you please check for us online if there's any questions? Colleagues online, remember you're also part of the whole discussion. You can write in the chat any questions that you have, or you can raise your hand so that we can recognize you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor, for reminding us of the people who are with us but are in the virtual space. While they are gearing up or preparing their questions, probably we should respond to the questions that we have. The first one is what does the collaboration mean to the students? So if we could get one of the institution leadership to respond to that, probably because they know more about that.
Thank you. Regarding that question, I think it came from who? From you, Prof. Ngowi. If you were listening to his welcoming speech, he did speak about the memorandum between us and them, and he spoke about the Vision 2030, which I know as a student you surely understand it, because it talks about internalization. And because we have international students, there goes the English. We have international students here from Lesotho. He also touched on that. So the lucky thing is that we have YouTube. You can go back and just zap back, and then you can see. Thank you.
Can you respond to that?
Okay. Oh, so you further want to respond? Okay, just check your mics there. Just if they are open. And the only one person.
Yeah, no, I'm saying that actually, like any other collaboration, especially this one, it has at least 3 pillars. One, because we are talking about Moshoeshoe, the whole issue is we need to create knowledge around that. Instead of that, all the time we refer to white scholars, we don't have our own. So therefore, what does it mean? It means we need to do more research amongst ourselves. What does that mean? It means we have to collaborate. Canadian institution. The other issue is the issue of student-staff exchange. You have to be able to go to Lesotho, wherever you want to go, simply because we can't be good in every area. There may be a professor there at the National University of Lesotho, or maybe there's someone here, CUT, or you want to go to the Polytechnic. Whenever that allows, then we have to be able to have that exchange. This is where students come in. The other issue is we have to share resources. We don't have enough resources, we need to collaborate. So all this is geared towards students because we have to build knowledge. So not leave it start from Banana School. So that is the whole idea.
Thank you very much. Do you want to respond to that? Yeah.
The whole Moshoeshoe is about changing the mindset of our youth.
Yeah.
So curriculum design and development processes that are going to take place between all these institutions involved in this will see to it that we develop a curriculum that will integrate all those ethos and the values that are inherent in Moshoeshoe. So it's all about, our interests are all about our youth. Curriculum design and development.
And that future is the students, they drive the youth. It's not for us, for you.
Thank you very much for asking that question. Because it really has brought up a discussion. It was important. That shows how important that was. The other question was, what protective measures are in place to protect heritage sites in Lesotho?
Can I be a late comer in this?
In the previous one.
In fact, part
Okay, let me allow
of
that.
the future discussions is to allow platform for youth to come and present here what how they see the future and what this history tells them. Yeah. It's not about dignitaries sitting in this room and for them deliberating and putting brilliant ideas without young people telling this collective what is in your mind and how do you think you benefit from this.
May I hold on to that and say we'll continue the discussion afterwards so that we can get to the other questions. I understand that this is a burning issue because it touches very much on what teaching and learning is about. The question which was next, which came after that, was what protective measures are in place to protect heritage sites, in particular in Lesotho. Ma'am, happy, would you want to respond to that?
I have not worked in Lesotho for so many years, honestly.
it's a difficult one. But I can tell you about what we're doing at the museums of South Africa. And I also work at a few other institutions where we protected heritage, or we sought to safeguard heritage. Royal Bafokeng Administration and also Robben Island Museum. Digitization. Basically, digitization is the answer. We digitize collections, we digitize archives, records, we digitize. Professor Mofeti said on the news that one of the things that helped her to cope with this issue of the burning of the library was the fact that most books or collections had been digitized. That's the first thing. But safeguarding of heritage, it's so broad. Basically, everything that heritage practitioners do is safeguarding heritage. From taking care of collections, all sorts of collections. I work in a natural history collection where we've got biological specimens of all sorts, where we've got archaeological and paleontological collections. And our preoccupation every day of the week is to make sure that those collections are safeguarded through temperature control, through making sure that those that are preserved in alcohol, the wet collection is, you make sure that the alcohol is enough to preserve the collections, through research of the same collections to make sure that whatever knowledge you have from collections is passed on to others, and you have a record somewhere in some journal. So it's a very broad topic that which we try. There are so many other things. We can have a discussion outside of this.
Okay, thank you very much. Colleagues, like I've said, we are living on borrowed time. Tomorrow we have workshops. And in those workshops there will be discussions. Otherwise we are going to disadvantage our online people, because at exactly the time that was set, 7:30, everything is going to cut off. So we are going to have a discussion by ourselves. So that's why I'm working on time. Time, Basotho, time. Borrowed time. Thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am, for reminding us of that. I'm hoping that is going to respond to that in relation to Lesotho.
What happened is that I'm the founder member of the Lesotho History Association. It's me, Mr. Zamba, and Ladima Tejan, as I was in the expectation. But what we did to actually preserve heritage, we decided that all these places of heritage, every year, we must take all the students together with the history teachers to those places to actually promote awareness amongst the students about how important are those situations. 2, it only says something about the organizer of this committee, because I know we have the South African Society of History Teaching, of which I was a member, even the executive member. Are they represented here? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
What we can say is that in Lesotho, as we see, to show the importance of our heritage, we are building a very big museum. For the first time in history, Lesotho is going to have a form of a museum that the world can also visit and learn about our culture and our customs. Besides that, within the National University of Lesotho, we are reviving documentation of our history. We are going to have the Lesotho chapter, which is going to document Moshoeshoe the first and all the Basotho history in the library. So this is our, like I said, we have taken another direction, a new approach of preserving our cultural heritage.
Thank you, Prof, for alerting us of those developments. The other ones, we had the issue of decolonization, not to disadvantage others. We also had the issue of educating the kings and chiefs to be relevant. I'm going to say, let us take those as ideas that we have to put on board. Mamela taba ena ya nako tle re tsebe gore re tsweleng pele re feng ba bang monyetla wa gore ba nne ba bue. There was also the issue of gore na dipasa di tloga neng naga e gutla neng. And the other issue ya teng, I don't know whether there's anybody who can respond to that. It's quite specific. It's when. It says when.
My critical question was that, for example, the prof there was defining, and other elders are defining the truths behind the stories of Moshoeshoe and other chiefs under the Lesotho kingdom. I said, how do we refine and update that particular history? Because the history that is in museums is written by white settlers. We must rewrite our own history. How do we update that particular history to fit our own context and for us to understand it as it was and as it is? Because when white settlers were putting that in history on museums, were omitting some truths on it and putting what they wanted to put there. How do we refine that? How do we update it?
Thank you very much for the clarification. That, ma'am,
I addressed this issue in my response to address. I spoke about museums and universities and the whole schooling system falling under knowledge production centers or the knowledge or the education sector. And all of these institutions needing to be transformed, first transform the people who work in these institutions. We then transform the curricula, we transform narratives. I spoke to issues of narrative reviews at the museums of South Africa. We transform exhibitions, we transform our public programs. When we go out to schools to present our public programs, we start there, we transform. We transform our collections, because collections that we have in most museums and in some institutions of higher learning were collected by this untransformed staff of these institutions. We transform all of those. Then we also need people who are willing to do research. I was asked, why did I not quote Africans? We publish, but we are not there yet, most of us. So we need people who are willing to publish. We need what Professor Mitsweta also, not some of us who published and then we decided to go to management. You know, we need people who are willing to dedicate their lives to research for a very long time. Unfortunately, research is something that requires patience, and those of us who are not very patient do not withstand the pressures that come with research. We need such people who are willing to research. We need people to go and become archaeologists and dig out this heritage and interpret it using African ways, not based on Western models. We need dedicated researchers who are willing to publish.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Happy. In addition to that, Mayor Prof.
I'm surprised that the Honorable hasn't seen the clarion call on documenting a book on Moshoeshoe. That is partly to reinstitute what we feel is missing, close the gap, bring in our own knowledge on what King Moshoeshoe did and the whole history behind him from our own perspective. So I hope that book will, all the chapters are going to be from us. So we have opened up, we have started actually to say, let us document this Moshoeshoe way. So I think you must start your research as soon as possible and bring what you know about him.
Thank you very much.
Everything you know about you, the book is already shared among the institutions.
Thank you very much, Prof, for the response. In the interest of time, can I please check whether we have any questions or comments from the virtual space? That is, Stefan, if you could check that for us. Which one?
About decolonization.
I think it was the answer, Ma'am, Happy and Prof for responding to that question. Disadvantaging others. And you want to respond to that?
Yes.
Before you do, because we still have the advantage that we are still going to be around and we're going to continue with the dialogue, I just wanted to give the people who are in the virtual space a chance to do so, because otherwise it's only going to be us who are talking about these issues and leaving those ones out. We have a hand there from Exirataba. That is, Stefan, if you could facilitate the meeting of the mic. Welcome, Maxi. I hope it's Exirataba. I'm sorry for that. If you may unmute your mic, that's it.
Dumelang, ke kopa ho lahlela molawana wa ka ho ditlhanyana tse mmalwanyana tse ke reng ho na le dintho tse re ka rareng tsa Sesotho, they were never colonized. E jwalo ka ho bala ha rona. Ka Sesotho o kgona ho bala ho tloha ho nngwe ho fihlela ho sekete. Mme ha o ka wa sheba 1, 2, 30 ha hona mo di nang le tshutshumetso ya sekgowa teng. Hona ho bontsha hore Mosotho wa kgale le pele a ka buiwa ho bala ona tseba ho bala le ho ngola ona na le mokgwa dipalo. Mme ntlha ya bobedi e bontshang hore ho na le dintho tsa rona tse sa hantle ba di-colonization ke e jwalo ka dihla tsa selemo. Ha hona mo Mosotho a ileng a ya sekolong hore a bolellwe hore ke Maria, ke Hlabula, ke Hwetla. Mme ya boraro e ba dikgwedi tsa rona. Ke Pherekgong, ke Hlakola, ke Mmesa ho fihlela ka Tshitwe. Mme di bontsha kamahang ya Mosotho le Mosotho ho the fauna and the flora. Mme ke e nngwe ya dintho tse re lokelang hore e ka re ka shebana le tsona. Ya ho qetela ke dinoka. Mme ke e nngwe ya dintho tse bontshang hore Lesotho le Freistata ke ntho e leng hobane ha o bua ka noka ya Tikwe, o bua ka Tikwane, o bua ka noka ya Ntsha, o bua ka noka ya Matsiripe. Tseno kaofela di bolela hore ke dibaka tse e leng hore kgale le pele makgowa a fihla e ne le dibaka tsa rona. Mme ha o bala dibuka tsa Sesotho ho na le mono thwe Morena Moshoeshoe ha ba ne ba ya ba lo tsoma kapa ba ne ba tswile sekolo ho nona le mone ba re ke naha ya moikutlo teng. Mme ha ne ba tloha dibakeng tse jwalo ka ho tloha mohlomong Basu ba tlella kwano ka hare ho Freistata ba ne ba re ke naha ya moikutlo teng. Mme he ke tse ding tsa dintho tse reng re ske ra sirelwa ho tsona ho bontsha hore we have certain things that resisted colonization, like the ones that I've alluded on.
For reminding us of our rich history, which has not been colonized yet. Do we have somebody else in the virtual space? That is Stefan?
Yes. Madam. Yes.
Can I just check whether we have anybody in the virtual space? Give them a chance and then I'll come to you. It doesn't look like. So if I may just allow another round of questions, very straight and to the point, so that we can answer them quickly. That you'll be one. I think that's the spirit on that motive.
I wanted him to respond on
The passport.
Something like that, then he wanted to respond.
Oh. He has been working on that for a long time.
We'll answer your question. Yes, you
That
will
too.
give an opportunity to answer that question.
Okay. Ala 19 to the 21st. Another virtual sensor conference. Another introducing the academics in the Yawa Maba. The virtual conference in the Duaga and the Sotu de Africa. We had 2 keynote speakers. One was Professor Sante, one of the Maput. Issue a Kolu Hapana, Nago Jinagita Wana, a free boom. Megere. Taben zeri kolita kopanya tabasa takomasi uchu zeri zeri submission o South African Council of Churches. So you are aware of Katabena Amayamana about to do that. They asked us to make a contribution. We have made a submission there. We're also asking our government. Our government is in constant touch with the government of South Africa, trying to find a way of easy movement between these two countries. So we are also going to make a well-researched document for our government to use in trying to resolve this matter. Make it better than our one excellency that they believe. This is an issue that we think is very, very important. However, given the nature of Lesotho vis-a-vis South Africa, I think it's important that we at least we have free movement, which, by the way, is also an issue that is promoted by the AU, a free movement of people. So we're saying, for us, it's a matter of life and death. We're told there are more than 400,000 Basotho. So that is an issue that we are trying to pursue through diplomatic, official lines, also making, we are saying our contribution should be informed by research. And that's what we are doing.
Thank you very much, Nate, for letting us know.
There's a very important point that should actually not be overshadowed by anything in this meeting of the one, that South Africans themselves have their mentality has to be decolonized. That's very important. Apartheid for 300 years damaged their manifesto. Which is why today when they are speaking, they are saying President Mandela is a sellout. And it's a fact. A book that is coming, that is and the student of the first actually addresses this issue. Because we may claim to be independent, but the relics of what apartheid has done to us is with us as we are speaking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nade. Unfortunately, we have to cut the session short, but we're not necessarily cutting it completely because we still have the opportunity to continue with our deliberations, but in another format, in a more relaxed and informal, if I may say so, environment. Thank you very much, Bombe Program Directors. I'll hand over to you. Thank you. Mentab saying, if we are not going to look after time, time is money. We women like money. So that's why apologies, colleagues, but we will still continue. Even tomorrow, we are still discussing these issues. And we would like to see some of you there, especially, like I said, our students, because there's a part there that specifically talks about
the curriculum and academic staff. So we would hope to see you there, and whatever you're carrying out today will continue tomorrow, and we will get something out of it. There's something that has changed in the program. Firstly, the part of the handover of the next year of the institution has been moved to the dinner. It will then be announced in the dinner where the handover, how the handover will be done. Then the second part is that the vote of thanks and the closing remarks has also been split. Professor Tladi will do the vote of thanks, and then our Honorable Morena Mopedi will do the closing remarks, but that will come after the announcements. So I hope we'll go in that order, and whoever will be on the podium will do that. Our keynote speaker was given an hour. He used 45 minutes. So I think everybody else is possible of doing that. Thank you. Prof?
Good evening. I welcome Moshlanka to Kupahore. Limbelin Dumelle. Hore Gimbe ki se rompo o raba suit. Me a ke raba suit is kampala na we ke. E fela suit ke raba suit tshaba sa hai. Se le suit mane. Ibile se tlolela ka ntano ho lekwa. Jale ha ke re ke isa hlompo ga Basotho buisise hore ile ke go gohle mo Basotho ba lengana teng. Ke mbe ke isa hlompo hape o morena moholo Mopedi ye wa a teng ka ga gona ha jwale yo ka netegile o ile mo re be o tlokisitse mo mosebetsi ona ka boteng ba hae. Ge a leboa ntate hore be o teng kwana. O na le His Excellency Ntate Bereng e leng High Commissioner jwalo ka motho wa moholo ka nnete ntate re a leboa hore o teng ka hara mona ho tla tlotla mosebetsi yona o mokana o entsweng. Ke kopa hore ka o kgetholwa o itswe ke tlo leboa pele ga ka go leboa fe. Ke kopa ho leboa Professor Mutiba, the former Vice Chancellor of the National University of Lesotho, le Mothei wa Moshoeshoe Institute of Peace and Leadership. Ka ditsebo tsa hae tsa nako e telele tseo a di sherileng le rona ka jekulena. Mme wa tseba hore ka baka la bane ke sebetsa le yena o ya nna go disantse ke le monyanyana o tla ke na le mathata ke lata yena. So I'm happy to see you tile ona ile a kgetha we jwale re mpe re mo share le yena. So I'm happy that he's here. Ka ditirala ga le bwana ke bile bo hape Dr. Mhapi ke motho wa moholo wa setšhaba ebile ke yo thuto ya ka je kulela yo re fumaneng re shebileng hore o tla bapala karolo e kgolo hore re ntshetse pele. Bommele wa ntate ke kopa o leboa ka o kgetholwa the acting principal and the acting vice chancellor and principal ya CUT Professor Ngoi o rebe o hostile le tjhabelo pele ya hae o rebe qetellong pula a re atamela gele di-institutions tsena ka bohlanka ba hae go thwe morena o dula matsholo o ge be o la rata mela o ge be taba tsena tse ilang ga qala ka je kulena di tsela pele di skala makala ke bua ka Sotho ba le itse le batla Semushweshwe gale ke ska twa o ga swala gale ha re upisisi gale le tla makatsa ba empa hape ke tlalakatsa ho leboa boetapele ba National University of Lesotho ka ketapele ya yona hobane hantle ka mane ka Lesotho ke bona batho yo re lebeletseng hore ka baka la hobane bana le lefapha lena la history hore ba re etella pele hona re tata hona le mo re tlang hana teng ka ditaba tsa curriculum design fela taba history re lebelletse bona hore ba etse mme taba ya hore be ba teng kwano ba participate ka nnete re se re lebohile haholo re beetse re leboha boetapele haholo rector John Simba e leng yana rector ya Lesotho College of Education o re be o teng re ntse re bua ka taba thuto ma students ya botsa ona ntle na taba tsena na tsona na di ba tshwaretseng that is Simba mosebetsi wa go bona hore taba tsena tsontso bua mana hore di fihla baneng ba setjhaba mme re a leboha ka tshehetso ena yo o faneng ka yona Professor Pusisi ka Motheo College ka nnete re a leboha wena le rona re a tshwana batho ba engineering and technology batho ba vocational education tsena tsa ho researcha taba tsa Sesotho a se sa go wa bona go etsa fela ho re etse jwalo ebile re etse ho fehla thuto re ntse re tlameha ho etsa jwalo hore thuto ene re tlo tla re e fetisa re tlise botsong ba rona mme ba tla re thusa bo CUT hore taba tseo di etsahale bo mme le bontate ke kopa hore ke mpe ke leboha haholoholo basebetsi ba di-institution tsena kaofela re tloha Lesotho kwana re le moifo wa dikolo tsena tse participatang mona di fapane mme ba sebeditse this thing had to be organized and I want to tell you higher organized like CUT all these partner institutions di kentse le tsoho mme ka nnete re a leboha hore na be ba sebeditse ka katleho ena e teng ke katleho ya bona kaofela re a leboha re kopa ho leboha hape specifically the organizing team e sebeditseng ka matla a maholo re ntse re ba kgathatsa ha ke fihla mona ne ke sa tsebe na o ya na ke ya kae ke ntse ke mona ka kopa security ha re ke hlaele ka mona I didn't know to fela ke fihla ka mala ke fumana hore ka nnete le bona ba tshwere ka matswana kaofela ba sebetsa so le a utlwisisa ona stress seo team ena e leng ho sona go ntho engwe le engwe mahetleng a bona rona re le baetapele se re tla fela re tlo ja tlhogo so ka nnete re a leboha hore be le re etseditse mosebetsi ono o kgabana ke kopa o leboha hape the media ba bua ka media hobane hangata re lebohe fela ditaba tsena tse mona re lebelletse ho di fihla setjhabeng mme di tla fihla setjhabeng ka sona fela ka ba phatlalatsi le batho ba nang le ditsebo tsa rona di fihla setjhabeng ba le dumela hore di tla fihla le pele re tseba hore di fihlile se ntse re le leboha e nngwe haholoholo ke kopa ho leboha rona mona ebile re fokoti emetswe ke SRC teng mona and also interact with the colleagues in Zahan. May I want to believe for the SRC social institutions in a detail. May have a sequel of Haliboa. Okay, banally interest ya okay. Ikabaka Ulena because Antam Sebe Juna, who called our Salamatong, Mazong Habo. Nteremono ka nnete ke se ke leboa bohle ba beileng mesebetsi ya bona ka thoko bao ba mona mo re leng hana teng physically empa hona le ba bang bao ba leng kwana in a virtual space ba ntseng ba mametse ba na le interest ditabeng tsena re kopa hore ha re ya pele taba tsena le ska la di shebela sebakeng se senyanyana fela sa Lesotho kapo taba tse senyanyana fela tsa Freestyle hantle taba tsena tsa Moshoeshoe se bua ka boAfrika ebile di tswela pele ya the way of life hantle na re batla ho phela jwang ka ntho e leng hore re tla ikotla sefuba ka yona eo bana ba rona ba tla e thabela hore ba etseditse yona ka mantswe bomme le bontate lebitsong la baetapele ba dikolo tsena tse participate mona le tse ding tse leng hana ditlatla ka nnete re a leboa le ka moso ngwana mopedi o kopa o fetisetse dibo tsa rona ntate o ga Basotho hore re leboile haholo re tlotleile mme CUT entse history for the first time sekolong sena ho na le this Moshoeshoe memorial lecture ke o tshabang wa next time e tla le ba Lesotho ga leboa ile le mo
o sile taba tsa gago mona ka bona o sonsietse tsona taba tsa gago okay Asho di beile ke batla fela ho etsa announcement ya hore this side there's a gala art gallery that is this side. It's just a small exhibition actually about some art, some cultural art. So when we leave after the closing remarks, we'll then just go this side, and this is the door that we'll use out to go out to do our refreshments. And obviously the refreshments, as it says there on your thingy, your program that is in front of you, it's at the CUT Hotel School. For those who do not know where the school is, I'm sure you'll be given correct directions to go there by somebody who will give them correctly. Where the hotel school is, that's where we will have our refreshments. I'm sure some of the people are very hungry. They've been here since this morning. So something to eat will be very nice. Now we will call upon Honorable Moremo Holomopeji to do the closing remarks and close this event. That day.
go ba hlomphe batsamaisi ba tshebeletso ya letsatsi lena ha ke mpe ke dumellwe beng ba ka hore ke isa ditlhompho tse kgethehileng ho motlotlega Basotho yeo kulang ha mokgahla hore ha bona ka o tla sitwa o tla kwano e bo ikgethela hore a rome eno morena wa ka e boholo e le morena moholo hore a tlotla moema bona mosebetsing ona. Mohlomong bomme le bontate ha ke hlalose fela hore eno a buang ha se yena moholo, eno a buang ke Ntsane, ke mohlanka ofising ya morena moholo, morena o teng ha rona mona. Jwale ka hobane ha ke a bona nku ka ntle ka mona, ke be ka mo hlahisa hoba jwale nka etsa jwale e tla tlameha ho tswa ho nna, mme jwale nna ha ke a tla le yona mona, ke tshaba ditaba. Bomme le bontate ka ho fetisisa gona re na mantswe ene re tlile fela o tla mamela le ho ithuta, empa jwalo ka ha o so itse re bue ha ke mpe ke supe tabe. Mohlomong jwalo ka ha puso di lana tsa botswa mona, mohlomong e ka nna ba hore re batla ho ba le taba ya ho ha sebobe phirisejele. Jwale o so sa tsebe na ebe go isa tabehela ha o ha solo se kapa se feletswe ke mahina fela ba le tsoba sa fela yona ka nnete se le ka mogana. Gele ka go qoba taba eo ha re etsa tjena, gele ka go bea meralo e tla re thusa go sasa ge tsebe hantle na re tswa kae. Ke rata wa tabeng e botswa ke bonne mo manare tabanyana e re tla edukisa jwang ho ba taba tse re buang ka tsona mo ke tse ngotsweng ke batho ba bang bao hantle mohlomong ne ba di ngola ho kgahla bona e se di le molemong wa beng ba tsona le Basotho. Jwale ga tseba bohle Basotho hore batho ne batho ba ditshomo, batho ba dithoko, ditaba tsa bona di sa ngolwe. Ha o batla ho iqala mono o tlo e sokola haholo hobane batho ba neng ba phela le yena ha ba sa le ilana ba neletsa na taba e ntseng e tloa ya ho yani e fihlang se le motsu mo e yang teng ka lebaka la ho ntse ho hleya ha ntse ya kwana mo e yang teng. Empa hona ha o bolele hore re se ka etsa letho, ka lokela ho ema re qale hona mona re etse ntho re tshwantse e re dumelang hore e tla re sebeletsa. Yena a buang bona ba bangata ha ba tsebe hona o amana jwang le Mopedi le Moshoeshoe. Ha ke hlalose mo khatshane ke tla bua ka mofumadi a mane fela ke re fela hangata ke ikutlwa ke bua ha sa ngata ke bua ntse ke sa utlwe ntse ke re jwale mofumadi wa pela ke nkgono kgodu ke re mo tseba a tla go ba dadi mona bua nna go ntse nthola mo mona go bu nkgono mpinya ha tla mama dadi ma ba utlwile jwale hona le nkgono ya tswalang Mopedi mo yeo a bitswang Manyene. Moradi wa hae bile nyebe moholo Mopedi ne se matsibolo lapeng le la nkgono Manyene. Ke ka lebaka leo o bona mererong yohle a motlotlei ka Lesotho ge nka karolo. Mererong yohle ya rona ka kwakwa ba nka karolo. Hantle re tlhabua pere hare batho ba babedi motho a le mong. Ke ne ke tlhalose tabeng hore mona hare ya tla ka phoso le haeba ntate a ntse a tlile ona ka bana mohlomong o ka etsa ska re sia ba bona ba tla tlile ka mona bele go tona le ka mona o tla ba tsamaya a sa re jwetsa ka mantswe yana beng ba ka ke re pele ke letso ke ena go di butse buleng mona. Ke la ga e qala memorial lecture mane mo re dulang teng ka tsheetso ya University of Freestata mane ka golong ya ho thweng ke ya Uniko shaka kopano ya Freestata ka bophara. Phephetso e tla ba teng e le tshwantse le lebelle le lona e tlo ba
go kenya ditsohle tse tla buwa mona tshebetsong go ba di tlo batla tsietso ya ditšhelete disebediswa tsohle tse tla batla gore gona o fihle o be documented haiba e ba dintho tse tshwanetse be documented ha eno ba ntho e bonolo re dutse ka buka e teng mono e sa re etsa le Dr. Malete ke bona moruti ke ane o teng mona ne le karolo ya rona re tsa taba tseo e se bile tletse le gole re ntse re thinta ka nako le matsatsi re sheba gona e be re tla etsa wang ka yona fela kgothaletso gore re se re hlokometse ha re sa le bang ha ke tsebe le bagolwane ka pole ba ina fela ha ka ha ba re bone tsatsi bile golwane hlong ka taba ba ina ba go se re tla tshwarana ka matsogo he go bona go taba e ya phethala e ba go bo adela ha se a batho ba itseng fela empa ke ya Basotho ka ke ya setšhaba ka kakaretso ana mantswe ke ana ke ntate ke yona ba dutseng teng pela ka mo ke o nne a mantswe ana gore ke bue mantswe ana wa leboa haholo pele ya pele mabewana batho ba boka dia tsholo
batho ba Bloemfontein batho ga le re ka sepitinyana fela mpunyana etswe ao ga le re mpunyana fela ka sepitinyana
Ge tloge ke Moshoeshoe wa ka di lebeola le neng lebeola ga mona henditedi lo hloma di so hlume ka ba kona di tla hlona maisao ga le boa morena ga ikokobetsa ga le boa mantswe a monate ka nnete occasion ena ehlile it's crazy ha be morena o teng ka hare ho rona jwale hona tjena go tlo ho etsa ke tlo tla ke bitsa my acting vice chancellor and registrar to come and just give some small token of appreciation to the family, the royal family. And ke tlo tla ke bitsa morena Moremoholo Mopedi, ke bitsa morena Ntsane Mopedi, ke bitsa morena Tsholo Mopedi.
Colleagues, as the standing there, will be led by the honorables out session this way. So we'll go ahead and our house out. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues online. See you tomorrow. Thank you for staying until this late. We appreciate your presence and participation. Bye.
Bueno, ya no ska negotiate. Okay.
Sharp.
Bontate ke a le amohela le phela hantle bontate nna hona le a sa nkutlweng ke a leboha ka lebitso ke ntate Molemohi Moilwa Rantaoleng haeso ke Thaba Bosiu kgetlile mona ho tla bontsha history ya Basotho ka ditshwantsho hore na ditaba tsena tse ntseng le di utlwa ka mane ha le se le fihla ka mona le tlo bona hore na ho jwang ke utlwile hore le di fumane kaofela jwale re mpe re qale mona ka setshwantsho sena seo re se bonang se pela rona ke setshwantsho se hlahisang Morena Mohlomi kgolong ya hae ho thwe ha sa hodile o la bitsa Morena Moshoeshoe o na ena le makwanyane ne le molaodi wa mabotho wa hae jwale a tlo molaya hore na a tle a buse jwang jwale ho thwe o na se a hodile mofumadi ya hae ke enwa ntse a mo lokisetsa dintho tsa hae ke ha ba le fothane ke botlotswe fothane ka jeno ke man mo thweng ke Clockland andate ke ha ba le hana teng ke tsela eo setshwantsho sena se hlahang ka teng andate jwale ka ha ditaba boholo se di buwe ka mane se ke tlo ba mokgutshwanyana haholo ne ke re fela mona ke Morena Moshoeshoe ha ntsa hola kgolong ya hae e ka ba dilemong tse hana a qeta ho fihla Thaba Bosiu e sa le mohlankanyana dilemong tsa ntsa bo 1824 andate jwale ha re feta setshwantsho sena sa Morena Moshoeshoe re tlo fihla ke setshwantsho sa Morena Moletsane sena seo re se bonang Morena Batau andate jwale hathi tshwantsho tse pedi tsena tse ka pele ho yena ke monna wa Mohlabani wa Mosotho ho bontsha hore na ba ne ba le ka tsela efeng ha ba futua etswe e ne le batho ba sepopeo se feng ge a e feta eno jwale mona e se le setshwantsho sa Morena Wetsi Morena Bagolokwe andate ke sona seno athe se pela sona ke setshwantsho sa bagodi bana ba fihla ba etswa ha bo bona kwana lemong tsa ntsa bo 1833 jwale ke tsela eo ba neng ba tsamaya ka yona ka dikolwana tse tsa bona tse ne di hulwa ke dikgomo di ne di tlwaelehile ka hore ho thwe ke di-spitere andate jwale dikolwana tsena ne di ditharo ho bonahala e nngwe ile ya sala tseleng ka lebaka la bane dibatana tsa naha di ne di ile tsa ja diphoofolo tsena tse ne di hula dikgomo tse dipholo tsena ya ba kganna tse pedi ho ya Thaba Bosiu ba sia e nngwe ke mona mo ileng ya re ha ba ilo lata ena ya boraro ya ba tlela Morena Moshoeshoe sefate sa Bleiko ho na le sefate se ileng sa hlongwa ka hodima Thaba ka mane ka selemo sa 1836 seo se ileng sa wa dilemong tsa bo 1980 ke sefate se neng Morena a dula tlasa sona ba ile ba fumana hore Morena Moshoeshoe ona itulela hara manana fela mono ha a bua ditaba tsa setjhaba ke ha bahudi ba tla motlela sefate seno ka bo madimabe se fedile hana jwale sila sacha kgweding tse pedi tse fetileng ke batho bana ba ile ka hodima Thaba ka mono andate ke a lebona jwale ke Morena Morosi yane andate ke Morena Morosi eno andate jwale yane ke mme Manthatisi ke mme wa Morena Sekonyela ke mosadi wa pele yaneng e ga hauwa ntweng a nke ya hae marumo le yena a ke a ohla batho etswe ho thwe hana a thapwa banna e mong le mong o na batla hore le yena o ba ka pele a o lwana jwale ke yena mme Manthatisi eno jwale ke motswalla wa Morena Moshoeshoe ke makwanyane yane re leng ga mmona yenwa athe batho bane ba mane bona ke mofumadi Mamahatu ke Mabela ke mogadi ya Sephephe ke kgaitsedi ya Mafa kampo Mmile botjheng ba hae ntate jwale mona ke mane mo difaqane di leng tsa qala ya teng ho thwe Morena Mohlomi o la a ba le pono ya taba ena e tlang ho etsahala a re o bona lerule le khubedu o na bolela hore ho tla ba le dintwa tseo Lesotho kapo batho ba batsho ba tla lwantshana be ho tlala madi ke lona qaleo ya le khubedu leno jale mona ke motho ya bitswang Mzilikazi o la tloa ha bona tala kwana yaba o le ba go teshia ha ba go teshia o la nna khutela mo gara Moshoeshoe a go lo hlasela mo gara Moshoeshoe ka le motsantsa mo 1831 yaba mo gara Moshoeshoe wa mohlola a balia a tsama a fela maideng a fela hana teng ntate jale mane mo go bonang batho ba thabileng ke pegetshwe eno ke mo gara Moshoeshoe ke yena ka letseng pegeno tshweu jale mona ke ha ke na thaba bosiu le montsane tsa bo 1852 ka ntwa yane ya manyesemane jale ho thwe ke segoki eno seno se ka peleng ba ne ba thabetse ha Morena Moshoeshoe a hlotse manyesemane ka hodima sehlaba sane sa Thuate ke pela hona le sebaka mono thwe ke dibeng sa masole mo ntwa ena e neng e lwanela teng jale Morena Moshoeshoe o la e hlola ka nnete tšhaba sa sila sa thaba ke taba eno jale mona ke Morena Lethole ena Morena Lethole ke yena motho wa pele yane wa hore Morena Moshoeshoe a etse selekane le yena ho thwe Morena Moshoeshoe o la hlokomela hore Morena Lethole o na le setjhaba se sengata nakong ya Morena Moshoeshoe a qalang ho bokella diboko tsena a re di kopane mmoho ba tlohele ho lwantshana e le hore e tle re ha hona le batho ba buang puo tse ding ba ba futuela ba tla ba be mmoho ho lwantsha dinyetseno jale ke Morena Lethole wa pele a ileng a etsa selekane le yena jale a fumana hore Morena Lethole o na le batho ba bangata yaba o re ho Morena Lethole e be yena ya tlang ho etella pele setjhaba sena hantle Morena Moshoeshoe o na le bohlale o ne a re monana ha o itshupe o ne a tseba hore setjhaba ha sena o dumela taba eo mme setjhaba yaba le yena Morena Lethole ka kotlolo o supa hore morena ko wena a tlileng ka taba ena e ka kgona e tle ebe wena ya tla etella ditaba tsena pele jale yaba ditaba tsena borena bona bo se bo sala ho Morena Moshoeshoe hobane morena a ne a supile Lethole ga taba ke tsa hao jale ke yena Morena Lethole eno ke Morena Manthati sena ke Morena Sekonyela ntate ke yena Morena Sekonyela motho ya ileng a hlaha Morena Moshoeshoe a bolla le montsantsa bo 1804 ke yena me Manthati
a sebedisa diboko intweng
jale mane ke nakong eo Morena Moshoeshoe a seng a hodile ho thwe o ile a bitswa ke Mosisi mona Bloemfontein jale a ba a mema Morena Sekonyela hore a tlo mo mamedisa ditaba tsena tsa Mosisi e ka ba dilemong tsane tsa hae ha ka ba dilemo di ka bang bo 82 ke pele ho nako ya hae ha e fihla jale Morena Moshoeshoe o ile a kopana le bo Mosisi moo le Maburu moo ba bua ditaba tsa hore na hobaneng ha ba ntse ba itshela naha ya Morena Moshoeshoe ke tsona ditaba tsa rona tse re reng ke nalane ka ditshwantsho boholo ba ditaba tsa ntse le ne re le tle le tlo di bona moo di entsweng ditshwantsho teng ke a le bona ke a le bona ke a le bona ke a itewela ntate ke a itewela
Jwale ke thabile haholo tate re ke motho wa hae se thaba bosiu hantle o tseba batho ba ba dibuang ka bone jwale he molekane wa ke ntate Tladi o ka itse a nna wa hore re ye kwa le tseba ka bone jwale ha sa le empa ke tse bana lelapa leno la Moshoeshoe re ibisa ka jobo fela jobo eno itse ha ba nka bokreste ya bo tloela lebitso la hae la lelosa
ke fela gore o leke sa nalane ya Moshoeshoe o leke go nolofatsa mokgwa wa thuto pakeng tsa ditsena tsa bokgoni tsa thuto e le go nolofaletsa bana ba Afrika gore qetong tsa tse ba tswa ikgopole mo ba tswang teng tlhabetse re ditshwa tlhape mohlomong boisa re sa kgefisa go le kana ka nnete sale go tla go tlhamana gore baby tsone ba tlhokanala sa go se mo tla le mo ifohle o wa gaso o bileng kwano